Hey guys, Nemo here again. Just want to say, it's been a while. Thanks for tuning in as always. And if you enjoy these stories, guys, please let me know in the comments what you think. And if you have any other great ideas, let us know. We'd love to hear your feedback. And now, as always, please enjoy the stories.
I still remember the night because it started way too normal. That is the part that messes with me the most. Nothing about the beginning felt creepy or dramatic. It was just another first date I almost canceled because I was tired after work and the bus was late and my phone battery was dying. If I had stayed home and watched random videos and fallen asleep on the couch, none of this would have happened. But instead I went. I met her through an app a couple weeks before. Her profile wasn't weird or mysterious or anything like that. Just normal pictures. Coffee shop selfie. One hiking photo. A blurry group shot at some rooftop party. She seemed chill, easy to talk to, the kind of person who sends voice notes instead of long texts. She suggested a place called Alder Table. I had never heard of it. She said it was an underground restaurant people usually find through word of mouth. Trendy but quiet. Good food. Cool atmosphere. She said it like it was her favorite spot in the city. I looked it up and barely anything came up online. A few photos that looked like they were taken on older phones. Brick walls, low lighting, fancy looking plates. It looked kind of cool actually. The address was on Alder Street, but the pictures showed a staircase going down below street level. When I got there, it was already dark outside. Alder Street isn't super busy at night. Mostly offices and closed shops. I almost missed the place because the sign was tiny and half hidden under a streetlight. Just the words Alder Table on a black metal plate next to a narrow door. The door led to a staircase that went down farther than I expected. The air got cooler the lower I went. The walls were concrete, and there were these little round lights set into the steps. At the bottom there was a host stand and a big open dining room. It looked nicer than I thought it would. Brick walls, dim lights hanging from cords, plants on shelves, that kind of trendy underground vibe people post online. She was already there sitting at a small two-person table near the middle of the room. I recognized her right away from her photos. Dark hair, green jacket, relaxed smile. The kind of person who seems comfortable anywhere. The date started normal, actually better than most first dates I've had. We ordered food, talked about random stuff like work, music, the bad apartments we had lived in before. Time moved pretty fast. The staff were quiet but polite. Black uniforms, calm voices, always walking slowly like they had nowhere else to be. The food was really good too. I remember thinking the place deserved way more attention online. At some point, I noticed the dining room layout felt slightly strange. Not scary strange, just confusing in a way I couldn't explain. There were several hallways branching off the main room. One led toward the bathrooms. Another had a small bar area. A third hallway disappeared around a corner where I assumed the kitchen was. But something about the spacing felt off. Like the room was bigger inside than it should be under that small building. I ignored it though because the date was going well. After dinner, we both stood up to leave. I checked my phone and realized it was later than I thought. The room was quieter now with only a few tables still occupied. We walked toward the staircase I remembered coming down earlier. Except it wasn't there. Instead of stairs, there was another hallway with framed photos on the wall. I stopped for a second thinking I must have turned the wrong direction. The place had low lighting and I figured I got mixed up. We walked down the hallway expecting it to lead somewhere. It curved once and opened right back into the same dining room. At first I thought it was just another entrance to the same room, but then I noticed something weird. The couple sitting near the brick pillar looked exactly like the couple I saw earlier when we were eating. Same clothes, same posture, same plate still on the table. I brushed it off. Maybe they just hadn't moved. We tried another hallway. This one had a door with a restroom sign. We passed the door and kept walking. It curved left, then right. Then it opened into the dining room again. The exact same room. Same tables, same people, same lighting. I actually laughed a little because I thought the layout was just confusing, like some kind of maze design. We tried the bar hallway next. Same result. Every path led back into the same dining room. That's when it stopped being funny. I checked the walls more carefully trying to find the staircase again. I was sure it had been near the entrance when I arrived. but every direction ended in the same place, like the building was looping in on itself. The weirdest part was the staff. They acted like nothing strange was happening. Waiters walked past carrying plates. A bartender wiped glasses behind the counter. The host stood calmly at the stand near one wall. None of them reacted to us walking around in circles. I finally approached the host stand, thinking maybe there was another exit I missed. The host listened quietly while I explained we couldn't find the stairs. He nodded politely. Then he gestured toward a hallway behind me. I followed the direction he pointed. It led to the dining room again. At that point, the air in the place started feeling heavier. Not physically heavy, just mentally. Like when you realize something doesn't make sense, but everyone else is acting normal. I walked faster, trying different hallways. Every route curved and twisted before opening back into the same room. The same diners. The same staff. Even the same plates still sitting on tables. Time felt stuck. I checked my phone again, but there was no signal. When I turned back toward my date, she was standing near the center of the room watching me wander around. She looked calm, not worried at all. That's when I noticed something about her expression that hadn't been there earlier. Not scary exactly, just patient. Like she had seen the situation before. She slowly walked toward me while I was still trying to understand what was happening. Then she casually explained the place. Not in a dramatic way, more like someone explaining why they like a certain cave. According to her, this restaurant wasn't just a restaurant. It was a kind of pocket space under the city where people could stay without time pushing them forward. Most people never found it. Some were brought here. She mentioned she had discovered it a long time ago by accident. Then she said something that made the whole situation drop into place in the worst way. She liked bringing people here, especially people she enjoyed spending time with. Because once someone entered the restaurant and stayed long enough, the exit slowly stopped connecting to the outside world. Eventually, every hallway just looped back inside. Good company could stay forever. I remember standing there trying to process that while looking around the room again. The couple near the pillar still hadn't moved. Their plates looked untouched now that I focused on them. At another table, a man sat staring at a glass like he had been frozen mid-thought. The staff kept moving, though, calm and quiet. I walked to the staircase wall again, even though I knew it wouldn't be there. Another hallway curved back to the dining room. At that point, panic finally hit me. I started moving fast through every path, turning corners, pushing doors, checking walls, trying to force my way into any area that looked different. But the restaurant never changed. Every route led back into the same room like the building was folding space. After a while, I stopped running. Not because I solved anything, because I realized something else. The people sitting at the tables weren't talking. They weren't eating. They were just there, like decorations. When I looked closer, some of them looked confused. Others looked empty. My date sat back down at our table like the night was continuing normally. I didn't sit. I kept walking the loops for a long time, hoping something would change. It didn't. Eventually, I ended up back at the table again. The food plates were still there exactly the way we left them. The staff kept moving calmly through the room. And every hallway still led back here. I don't know how long I've been inside now. There are no windows. My phone battery died hours ago. Sometimes new people appear walking down one of the hallways looking confused like they just arrived. They usually start doing the same thing I did earlier, walking fast, checking corners. Eventually, they slow down. Then they sit. The restaurant stays quiet. The staff keep working. And the exits never appear again. Something weird happened at my last first date, and I still don't know what part of it scares me more. The guy himself, or the idea that he might be telling the truth. I keep going over the night in my head trying to figure out if I missed something obvious, like some trick or prank, but nothing fits. The whole thing still sits in my brain like a loose puzzle piece. It started on a Tuesday night, which already felt like a strange day to meet someone new. Most people do Friday or Saturday for dates, but my schedule is messy, and he said he worked late most weekends. I almost canceled because it had been raining all afternoon, and the sidewalks were soaked, and I just wanted to stay in my apartment watching dumb videos. But I went anyway. We matched on an app a few days before that. His profile wasn't anything special. Just a regular looking guy with brown hair and a simple smile in most of his photos. No weird bio either. Just a couple normal things about liking coffee, night drives, and old movies. Honestly, the profile looked so average that I almost swiped past it. His name was Eric. The plan was to meet at a place called Lantern Market. It's not exactly a restaurant. It's more like an indoor food hall with a bunch of small stalls and long tables in the middle. The building used to be an old warehouse near the river, but they turned it into a trendy spot with string lights and neon signs everywhere. When I got there, the place was loud, but in a good way. People talking, music playing, cooks yelling orders behind the counters. It smelled like grilled food and sweet pastries all mixed together. Eric was already there sitting at one of the long wooden tables near the back wall. I noticed him right away because he stood up the second I walked in, like he had been waiting for that exact moment. Not just noticing someone entering. It looked more like he knew it would be me. At first, I didn't think much about it. People can just guess sometimes. The first few minutes felt normal enough. We grabbed food from different stalls and sat down at the table. I had noodles, and he got some kind of burger. That's when the small weird thing started. It wasn't anything huge at first, just tiny moments that felt slightly off. For example, I was about to ask him how long he had lived in the city when he suddenly nodded and wrote something on a napkin with a pen he had in his pocket. Then he slid the napkin across the table. The napkin said 3 years. I hadn't even asked yet. At first I laughed because I thought he was joking around, somehow guessing my question, but he kept doing it. Every time I started to think of something to say, he would react a second early. Sometimes he would just smile like he knew what was coming. Other times he would answer the question before I actually asked it. It happened with random stuff too. I thought about asking if he had siblings. He immediately said one older sister. A few minutes later, I was going to ask what neighborhood he lived in. He told me the name of the neighborhood while I was still thinking about the question. At that point, I started wondering if I was being obvious somehow. Maybe my face showed what I was about to say. Some people are really good at reading expressions. But then something happened that made it way harder to explain. I picked up my drink and was about to mention that the place looked like it used to be a factory or something. Before I said anything, he grabbed another napkin and wrote something again. He pushed it across the table. Old warehouse from the 1940s converted 10 years ago. Exactly what I was about to bring up. That's when I started feeling uncomfortable. Not scared yet, just confused. He didn't act creepy though. That was the strange part. He looked relaxed, like the night was going exactly how he expected. After a while, I decided to test it. Instead of saying anything, I tried thinking of something really random, like asking if he believed in aliens. Before I even opened my mouth, he leaned back slightly and nodded. Then he wrote on another napkin. Probably somewhere out there. I remember staring at the napkin for a few seconds trying to process that. There's no way someone can guess that kind of thing over and over. The night kept going like that. I would think of something, and he would react before I spoke. Sometimes answering directly, sometimes writing it down. The stack of napkins on our table kept growing. I started feeling like I was behind in a conversation that hadn't even happened yet. Eventually, I asked him how he kept doing that. I needed some kind of explanation. He looked down at the napkins for a moment and then back at me with his tired kind of smile. Not proud, not smug. More like someone who had already gone through this conversation many times. Then he explained. Not dramatically, just calmly. According to him, this wasn't actually our first date. He said it was our 12th. The first time he said that, I thought he meant we had matched before and forgot about it. Dating apps glitch sometimes. Old chats disappear. But that wasn't what he meant. He said we had met 11 other times over the past few months. Always a first date. Always the same pattern. We would match on the app again like it was the first time. Plan a meeting. Sit down somewhere. And eventually he would realize I didn't remember anything. At that point, I honestly thought he was messing with me. But he kept explaining things that got more specific. He described a coffee shop we supposedly went to 3 dates ago, a place with yellow chairs near a train station. Then he mentioned a pizza place from another night. Then a small park bench where we sat during one of the earlier meetings because the restaurant was closed. He knew the exact food I ordered at 2 of those places. He knew the jacket I wore during one date when it was colder outside. The weird part was that some of the locations sounded vaguely familiar, like places I might have gone before. But I couldn't remember being there with him. According to Eric, the pattern always ended the same way. Near the end of the night, I would start feeling tired and confused. Then eventually, I would forget the entire evening. The next time we matched on the app, I acted like we had never met. At this point, I didn't know if I should laugh or leave. But the way he explained everything didn't feel like a joke. He pulled out his phone and showed me a folder of pictures. Not creepy pictures, just photos of places, tables, coffee cups, food. In almost every photo, there was an empty chair across from him. He said he stopped taking pictures of me because they disappeared later. Not deleted, just gone. The files would corrupt or vanish from his phone. But the background images stayed. I looked through a few of them and started recognizing things. One of the tables looked like the same park bench you mentioned earlier. Another photo showed a pizza box with a topping I usually order. My stomach started twisting at that point. He said this was the 12th attempt at finishing a full conversation with me. The problem was that something always happened before we could figure out why I kept forgetting. Usually around the 2-hour mark of the date. He checked his watch while explaining that. Apparently we were already close to that point. I didn't know what to believe anymore. The entire story sounded impossible. But at the same time, he had predicted almost everything I had thought about saying the whole night. He said that part was simple. After 11 first dates, he basically memorized how I talk and what questions I ask. Every conversation follows the same path. Same topics. Same order. Same reactions. He knew the script. Then he said something that made the whole situation worse. He wasn't sure the memory loss was random. He thought something might be resetting the date every time. Like something didn't want the conversation to go too far. Right after he said that, I noticed something strange happening in my head. It started as a dull pressure behind my eyes. Not pain exactly. Just this heavy, foggy feeling. Like when you stay awake too long and your brain starts slowing down. I tried focusing on the details around me. The lights in the market. The noise of people talking. The stack of napkins on the table. Eric noticed it immediately. He looked frustrated but not surprised. He started writing something quickly on another napkin and pushed it toward me. I remember looking down at it, but the words were already getting hard to focus on. The last thing I clearly remember from that night was him watching me with the same tired expression. Like someone stuck repeating the same evening over and over. When I woke up the next morning, I was in my apartment with no memory of how the date ended. My phone had a new match notification on the dating app. The profile looked familiar, but I couldn't figure out why. The name was Eric. And for some reason, when I opened the chat, my first thought was that we should meet somewhere casual for a first date. I did not think a random Tuesday night would turn into the weirdest date of my life. It started in the most normal way possible, which is probably why the whole thing still messes with my head when I think about it. I matched with her on Tinder around midnight a few days before. I was just lying on my bed scrolling like everyone does when they cannot sleep. Most profiles blur together after a while, but hers stood out because she had almost no photos. Just 3. One was her sitting on some stone steps somewhere. Another was her holding a coffee cup and looking away from the camera. The last one was a picture of a hallway full of old statues. Her bio was short. It said she liked quiet places and strange museums. I swiped right mostly because I was bored, and also because she looked normal enough. Honestly, I expected nothing to happen. Most matches never turn into anything. But she messaged first. The conversation felt weirdly easy. Not exciting, not flirty, just calm. She asked what kind of places I liked going to. I said anywhere that was not too crowded. She said she knew a place like that. After about 2 days of messaging, she asked if I wanted to meet. I said sure. She suggested a small museum outside the main part of town. I had lived in the area my whole life and had never heard of it. She said it stayed open late and hardly anyone went there. That alone should have made me question things, but honestly it just sounded interesting. Better than sitting in some loud restaurant trying to talk over music. So that night I drove out there. The place was about 30 minutes outside the city, tucked between trees, and an old road that barely had streetlights. The building looked more like a house than a museum. 2 floors, gray stone walls, narrow windows. The parking lot had only 3 cars. Mine made 4. I remember sitting in my car for a second thinking how quiet everything felt. No traffic noise, no people walking around, nothing. Then she pulled in. Her car parked next to mine and she stepped out. She looked exactly like her photos. Dark hair, pale skin, oversized jacket even though the weather was not that cold. She smiled when she saw me. We walked to the entrance together and went inside. The lobby was small. There was a desk but no one sitting behind it. Just a little sign that said visitors could leave $5 in the box near the door. I dropped $5 in and she did the same. That should have been another sign something was off. A museum with no staff at night. But again, I ignored it. Inside the place smelled like old wood and dust. The lights were dim, but still bright enough to see everything clearly. The museum was basically one long hallway with rooms branching off it. Every room had sculptures. Not huge famous ones like you see in big museums. These were human-sized statues made of stone or plaster. Most of them looked like regular people. People sitting. People walking. People covering their faces. It was actually pretty interesting at first. Some of them looked so detailed that you could see wrinkles around the eyes or tiny lines on the hands. She seemed really excited to be there, way more than I was. She kept walking ahead of me and pointing things out. She showed me one statue of a guy leaning back in a chair with his mouth open like he was yelling. Another was a woman crouched on the floor with her hands over her ears. One statue looked like a man frozen mid-step, eyes wide, mouth stretched open. That one bothered me a little. I remember thinking whoever made these sculptures really liked capturing people in moments of panic or pain. The more we walked through the rooms, the more I noticed the same thing. Almost every statue looked like someone caught during the worst moment of their life. Some looked scared. Some looked like they were trying to run. A few looked like they were screaming. The weird part was how realistic the faces were. Not just detailed, but almost too accurate. Like someone had studied the exact way a person looks when they are terrified. I tried to joke about it in my head, but the place was so quiet that even my footsteps sounded loud. She seemed completely relaxed, though. She walked slowly from statue to statue like she had seen them many times before. At one point, we entered a smaller room that had maybe 8 sculptures inside. All of them were positioned around the walls. Every single one had the same kind of expression. Mouth open. Eyes wide. Bodies twisted like they were trying to move away from something. I stood there for a minute just looking at them. Something about them made my stomach feel heavy. Not because they were scary exactly, but because they looked too real. Like actual people frozen in time. She noticed me staring. She walked up beside me and looked at the statues with this calm little smile. Then she started pointing them out one by one. She described details about each one. The position of the hands, the angle of the head, the shape of the mouth. It sounded less like someone describing art and more like someone remembering moments. I remember thinking maybe she worked there or studied sculpture or something. We moved deeper into the museum. The hallways twisted in weird directions. Every new room had more statues. Some were unfinished looking, like rough shapes that had not been fully carved yet. Others were so detailed they almost looked like real people covered in gray dust. After about 30 minutes, I noticed something strange. Some of the statues looked modern. Like their clothes were not old. One statue had a hoodie that looked exactly like something you could buy now. Another looked like a guy wearing sneakers and a jacket that looked straight out of a mall store. That made no sense if this was supposed to be some old art museum. I started paying closer attention. Another statue looked like a college guy holding a phone in one hand. The phone was carved too. I remember feeling this slow creeping thought in the back of my mind, but I kept brushing it off. We reached the last room at the end of the building. This one was bigger than the others. Maybe 20 statues were inside. All of them had the same expression. Wide open mouths. Screaming faces. Arms frozen in defensive positions. I walked between them slowly. The realism was insane. One statue had tiny lines under the eyes like someone who did not sleep enough. Another had stubble carved onto the chin. Another had a jacket zipper carved down to the tiny metal teeth. I leaned closer to one of them. It was a guy maybe around my age. His mouth was stretched open like he was yelling. His eyes were huge. And there was something about the face that made my brain itch. Like I had seen him somewhere before. Not exactly recognized him, but something about the face looked familiar in a normal person kind of way. not like an art piece. More like someone you would see walking past you on a street. I stepped back and looked around the room again. All of them had that same feeling. Too real. Too specific. She walked up next to me again. For a while, neither of us moved. Then she leaned a little closer toward me. Her voice dropped to almost nothing when she explained something about the statues. She told me those were her past dates. The ones who said something stupid. For a few seconds, I honestly thought she was joking. Like some dark humor thing. I looked at her face to see if she was smiling. She was not. She just stared at the statues calmly. Then she started walking again like nothing unusual had been said. I stood there trying to process what she meant. Part of me wanted to laugh it off. Another part of me felt this cold pressure building in my chest. I walked past one of the statues again and noticed something new. The hair. It did not look carved. It looked like real strands hardened into the surface. Another statue had fingernails that looked way too real for stone. My brain started connecting things I did not want to connect. The empty front desk. The weird modern clothes on some statues. How she seemed to know every sculpture like a memory. She had stopped near the door of the room and was watching me. Not smiling. Just waiting. I did the only thing that felt logical. I told her I needed to use the bathroom. She pointed down the hallway. I walked out of the room slowly and faster once I reached the corner. The hallway back to the entrance suddenly felt longer than before. I kept thinking about the statues behind me. Their faces. Their clothes. How normal they looked. I'd reached the lobby and pushed the door open. The parking lot was still empty except for our cars. I got into mine and drove away without looking back. I expected my phone to blow up with messages later that night. It never did. She never contacted me again. A few days later, I tried finding the museum online. I could not find anything about it. No website. No reviews. Nothing. I even drove down that road again the next weekend. The building was still there. But the parking lot was blocked by a metal gate and a sign that said the property was closed to visitors. I did not try going in again. Sometimes I still think about that room. All those statues frozen mid-scream. And the way she calmly described them like memories.
Hey guys, really sorry to disturb you, but if you're enjoying the stories up until this point, please smash that like button. That's all I'm asking for you guys. Let's break some records this year. Now back to the stories.
I noticed it before the food even arrived, and once I noticed it, I could not stop watching. It sounds small when I say it like that, just blinking. People do it all the time without thinking. You do it every few seconds and never pay attention. But that night I realized something was wrong about 10 minutes into the date. He had not blinked once. The weird thing is the night actually started really normal. Honestly, it started better than most Tinder dates I have been on. Those usually feel awkward from the first minute, like both people know there is a chance the other one will leave halfway through. This one did not start like that. I matched with him about a week earlier. His profile was simple. A few photos, normal-looking guy, brown hair, thin glasses. He had a picture of himself sitting on a hill somewhere with a sunset behind him. Another one where he was holding a cup of coffee in a bookstore. His bio said he liked quiet places and late-night food. Nothing strange. We talked for a few days and he seemed calm. Not overly funny, not weird, just relaxed. He asked normal questions. What I studied, where I liked to go, what movies I liked. Eventually, he suggested meeting at a small diner near the highway outside town. The place stays open late. I had been there before with friends after long drives. Nothing fancy. Just booths, old lights, and a jukebox that almost never works. I got there around 8. He was already sitting inside in one of the booths near the window. First thing I noticed was that he looked exactly like his photos. Sometimes Tinder photos lie a lot, but this time it was pretty accurate. Second thing I noticed was how still he sat. He was not scrolling on his phone or looking around the diner like most people waiting for someone. He was just sitting there with his hands folded on the table, looking straight ahead, at me. I remember thinking it was a little intense, but I ignored it and sat down across from him. We started talking right away. It felt normal enough. He talked slowly but clearly. He asked about my classes and where I grew up. I asked what he did for work, and he said he was studying medical stuff related to eyes. That stood out a bit, but it did not sound creepy at the time. Lots of people study medical things. The waitress came by, and we ordered food. Nothing fancy, burgers and fries. While we waited, we kept talking. That is when I noticed the blinking thing. I was looking at him while he talked and my brain suddenly realized something felt off. His eyes were open the entire time. Not wide open in a crazy way, just open, steady, focused right on me. At first I thought maybe I just missed the blinks because I was not paying attention earlier. So I kept watching. 1 minute passed, then another. Still nothing. Most people blink around 15 times a minute. I actually Googled that later because I could not stop thinking about it. But he just kept talking and looking at me like normal. No blinking. His eyes started to look a little watery after a while, but he did not wipe them or anything. He just kept staring. I started to feel weird about it, but I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe he just blinked really slowly or something. The food arrived. He took a bite of his burger while still looking at me. Still not blinking. I remember looking down at my fries for a bit because it was starting to make me uncomfortable. Whenever I looked back up, his eyes were still locked on me. The thing is, his face looked relaxed. He was not doing anything aggressive or scary, just talking about random things like movies he liked and places he had been. But those eyes stayed open the entire time. I started counting in my head at one point. 20 seconds. 40 seconds. 1 minute. Nothing. At that point, I started feeling this strange pressure in my chest. Not panic exactly, just a strong feeling that something was not right. I tried looking away more often to make it less obvious that I was watching his eyes. But every time I looked back up, they were still open. Not even a quick blink. It reached the point where my brain kept waiting for it. Like when someone is about to sneeze and you know it is coming. Except it never came. After maybe 30 minutes, I realized I had not seen him blink the entire night. Not once. His eyes looked slightly red by then, but he still did not react. At one point, the waitress came by to refill our drinks. Even when he turned his head to thank her, his eyes stayed open. It started messing with my focus during the conversation. I barely remembered what he was talking about because my brain kept locking onto his eyes. There was something unnatural about how still they were. People blink for a reason. Your eyes dry out if you do not. But he acted like it was nothing. Finally, I could not hold the question anymore. I asked him about it. I tried to say it casually, like a random observation. The second I asked, he went quiet. The diner around us kept making its normal noises. Plates clinking, someone laughing near the counter, the hum of the soda machine. But he just sat there staring at me. Still no blinking. Then he leaned forward slightly across the table. That was the closest he had moved all night. His face got a little closer to mine, and his voice dropped lower when he explained why he was doing it. He said he was practicing. Practicing for when he finally replaced his eyes with mine. I honestly thought he was joking for about 2 seconds. But his face stayed completely serious. And those eyes still had not blinked. My stomach dropped instantly. I remember looking around the diner like maybe someone else heard that and would react, but nobody was paying attention to us. He kept talking after that. He explained how he had been studying eye transplants and how he believed it was possible to do it himself if he prepared enough. He talked about how important it was to keep the eyes steady during removal. That is why he practiced not blinking, so the muscles would get used to staying open longer. He said my eyes were the exact color he had been looking for. I wish I could say I handled that moment calmly, but I did not. My brain went straight into panic mode. I pushed my plate away and told him I needed to leave. He did not try to stop me. He just watched me stand up, still with those eyes open. As I walked toward the door, I looked back once. He was still sitting there in the booth exactly the same way, watching me, not blinking. I got into my car and drove home way faster than I should have. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door and checked the windows, even though that sounds dramatic. I kept thinking about his face leaning across the table, and the way he said he was practicing. The next day, I opened Tinder to unmatch him. His profile was already gone. Deleted. Or maybe he blocked me. I do not know. But sometimes when I think about that night, The part that sticks in my head the most is still the blinking thing. Because during that entire day, from the moment I sat down to the moment I left, I never once saw his eyes close. Not even for a second. I did not realize something was wrong at first. The night started so normal that if someone had told me how it would end, I would have laughed at them. Honestly, the weird part only started because I have a habit of checking the time too much. I check the clock constantly. My phone, wall clocks, my car dashboard, anything. I do it without thinking. Probably because I am always late for things and I am always worried about it. That habit is the only reason I noticed what was happening. It was a Friday night when the date started. I remember the time very clearly because I looked at the clock on my phone while I was parking. 7:00 p.m. exactly. I had matched with this girl on Tinder 3 days earlier. Her name was Melissa. At least that was the name on her profile. She had a few photos that looked pretty normal. One outside near a lake, one sitting in a cafe with a book, and another selfie in her car. Nothing weird. We talked for a bit, and she seemed chill. Not overly talkative, but friendly enough. She suggested meeting at this small place outside the city. It was not exactly a restaurant. More like one of those roadside diners attached to an old gas station. I had driven past it before, but never stopped there. The building sat right next to a long stretch of highway with almost nothing else around except trees and empty land. When I pulled into the lot, I saw her car already parked there. The inside of the diner looked older than I expected. Yellow lights, worn boots, and one big clock hanging on the wall near the kitchen. That clock becomes important later. She was sitting in a booth near the back. First thing I noticed was that she looked a little different from her photos. Not in a bad way exactly, just slightly off, like the photos had been taken a while ago. Her face looked a little thinner in person, but that happens sometimes, so I did not think much about it. We started talking right away. Normal stuff. Where we grew up, what we did for work, things like that. She spoke slowly and smiled a lot. Not in a creepy way, just calm. I remember checking the clock on the wall while we talked. 7:18 p.m. The waitress came over and we ordered food. Burgers and fries. Pretty standard diner stuff. While we waited, we kept talking about random things. She asked a lot of questions about my routine, where I worked when I got home each night, what days I usually stayed out late. At the time, it just felt like normal date conversation. I checked the clock again after a while. 7:42 p.m. Nothing strange yet. The food arrived and we started eating. That is when the first weird thing happened. I remember taking a sip of my drink and glancing at the clock again. 7:00 p.m. Exactly 7:00. I stared at it for a second thinking maybe I misread it before. Clocks in old diners are sometimes wrong. So I pulled out my phone to check the time. 7:00 p.m. there too. That confused me because I clearly remembered it being later. I shrugged it off and assumed I had just mixed things up in my head. We kept talking. Maybe 10 minutes passed. Then I checked the clock again. 7:19 p.m. That felt normal. So I ignored the earlier moment and kept eating. But the weird part happened again later. I remember leaning back in the booth and stretching my neck because my back was starting to hurt. I looked at the clock again. 7:00 p.m. Again. Exact same time. This time I felt my stomach drop a little. I checked my phone again. 7:00 p.m. there too. I even unlocked it and waited a few seconds to see if the minute would change. It did not. The thing is, everything around me still looked normal. The diner lights were the same. The waitress was walking past the tables. Cars occasionally drove past outside, but something felt wrong. I looked back at Melissa. She was watching me in a very calm way. Not smiling this time, just watching. I tried not to think too much about it. Maybe my phone was glitching. Maybe the clock battery was dying. I told myself there had to be a normal explanation. We started talking again. She asked another question about where I usually go on weekends. I answered and tried to act relaxed. After a few minutes, I checked the clock again. 7:21 p.m. So time was moving again. That should have made me feel better, but it actually made things worse. Because now I knew something strange had happened earlier. I kept watching the clock more often after that. Every few minutes. 7:29 p.m. 7:35 p.m., 7:48 p.m. Normal time movement. Then it happened again. I looked up from my plate and checked the clock. 7 o'clock p.m. Exact same position of the hands. Exact same second. My chest tightened. I quickly looked down at my phone again. 7 o'clock p.m. But something else was different now. The food in front of me looked untouched. My burger was back to its original shape. The fries were piled neatly like they had just been served. I slowly looked back at Melissa. She was sitting exactly the way she had been when I first walked in. Hands folded on the table. Head slightly tilted. Watching me. That's when I realized something horrible. The night had restarted. I did not know how or why. But everything was back at the beginning. The waitress even walked toward our table again with the same menus in her hand. I felt this heavy confusion building in my head. The same conversation started repeating. She asked the same first question again, about where I grew up. I answered automatically because I was too shocked to think. Everything played out the same way for a while, until I checked the clock again later. 7:18 p.m. Then eventually again. 7 o'clock p.m. Another reset. This time something else changed though. Melissa looked slightly different. It was subtle. Her smile seemed wider than before. Her eyes looked darker. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it because of the stress. But every time the clock reset to 7 o'clock p.m., something about her changed. Small things at first. Her teeth looked sharper. Her eyes seemed larger. Her face stretched a little when she smiled. The loops kept happening. Each time I would get further into the night before checking the clock again. Each time it reset. Each time she looked worse. Her skin slowly became pale gray. Her smile started showing too many teeth. Her eyes stopped blinking during conversations. And the strangest part was that she seemed more aware with each loop. In the early months, she acted normal. Later, she started watching me more carefully. Like she knew I was noticing the resets. One loop stands out more than the others. I had managed to avoid checking the clock for a long time. We talked for what felt like almost an hour. Her face already looked wrong by then. The smile stretched too wide across her cheeks. Her eyes looked too large for her face. Then I made the mistake of glancing at the clock. 7 o'clock p.m. again. When the scene reset that time, she was already smiling when I walked into the diner. Like she remembered the previous loops. Her teeth looked long and uneven. Her eyes reflected the diner lights in a strange way. That is when real panic kicked in. I tried leaving the diner during one of the loops. I stood up and walked for the door before the food arrived. But the moment I looked at the clock near the exit, 7 o'clock p.m., I was back outside in the parking lot stepping out of my car again. Every time the reset happened, she looked more like something else. Less human. Her mouth stretched further across her face. Her fingers looked longer. Her eyes started reflecting light like an animal. In the final loop, I remember she was barely recognizable. Her skin looked gray and tight over her face. Her smile showed rows of sharp teeth. And she watched me with these huge black eyes that barely moved. I tried not to look at the clock anymore after that. I just stared at the table. But eventually curiosity always got me. And every time I checked. 7 o'clock p.m. The last thing I remember clearly is one of the later loops when she leaned closer across the table. Her face looked almost fully monstrous by then. And the worst part was how calm she looked. Like the loops were exactly what she wanted. I do not know how many resets happened after that. I stopped counting. The clock still reads 7 o'clock p.m. every time I look up. And she keeps looking. The moment I stepped into that house, I knew something was wrong. But at the same time, I kept telling myself I was just being dramatic. I remember standing on the front porch with my phone still in my hand, looking at the address again to make sure I had the right place. The house looked normal enough from the outside. 2 floors, light blue siding, a small porch light glowing above the door. Nothing creepy about it. But something about the quiet felt weird. The street was in a neighborhood I had never been to before, about 20 minutes outside the city where things get more spread out. Bigger houses, bigger yards, less streetlights. I checked the time on my phone and saw it was 6:58 p.m. I was almost exactly on time. My date had told me to come at 7 o'clock p.m. for dinner. His name was Dylan. We matched on Tinder about 4 days before. He seemed pretty normal during our messages, maybe a little quiet but polite. He told me he liked cooking and said he would make dinner for us if I came over. Normally, I would not go to a guy's house on the first date, but he seemed calm, and the way he talked about cooking actually sounded nice. Plus, I had checked his social media and everything looked real. Photos with friends, old posts, normal stuff. Nothing about it raised alarms. So there I was standing on his porch holding a small bottle of soda I bought on the way over because I did not want to show up empty-handed. I knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately. Dylan stood there smiling like he had been waiting right behind it. He looked pretty much like his pictures. Tall, brown hair, thin face, kind of quiet looking. He thanked me for coming and stepped aside so I could come in. The moment I walked through the doorway, I noticed the smell of food. Something roasted, maybe chicken or beef. It actually smelled really good. The living room lights were warm and the place looked clean. Family photos on the walls, a big couch near the window, a long dining table further back. It looked like a normal family house. For about 2 seconds. Then I noticed the people. There were way more people inside than I expected. At first I thought maybe 2 or 3 relatives were visiting, maybe parents or siblings. But when I looked around properly, I realized there were a lot more. People sitting on chairs. People standing along the walls. People sitting quietly at the long table. Dozens. I froze right near the entrance because suddenly every single person in the room was looking at me. Not casually either. All of them were staring directly at me like they had been waiting for me to walk in. The house went completely quiet. No talking. No music. Just the sound of the kitchen fan running somewhere in the background. I remember feeling this weird heat in my face because I did not understand what was happening. Dylan walked a few steps into the living room and gestured around like everything was totally normal. He started introducing me to people. His parents. His aunts. His uncles. Cousins. Grandparents. More cousins. I honestly lost track after the first few names because there were so many. At least 20 people in that house. Maybe more. And every single one of them kept staring at me the entire time. Not smiling much. Not greeting me in the normal way people do. Just watching. It made my stomach feel tight. I remember trying to smile politely and wave a little like you do when you meet a lot of people at once. A few of them nodded slightly, but most of them just kept staring. The dining table in the back of the room was already set up. Plates. Glasses. Silverware. But there were way more places set than just 2. More like a huge family dinner. I looked at Dylan hoping he would explain why his entire family was there for what was supposed to be a first date dinner. But he just kept smiling calmly. He led me toward the table and pulled out a chair for me. I sat down slowly because I still did not understand what was going on. The rest of the family slowly filled the other chairs around the table. Some stayed standing behind us. It felt like being surrounded. I tried telling myself maybe this was just a cultural thing. Maybe his family was very close and always ate together. But something about the silence felt wrong. Nobody was talking. They were all looking at me. Not in a friendly, curious way. More like they were studying something. Like they were observing every little movement. The kitchen door opened and an older woman walked out carrying a large dish of food. She placed it in the center of the table and stepped back. The smell filled the room. Roasted meat and vegetables. It looked like a big family dinner. But nobody started eating. Everyone was still watching me. Dylan sat next to me with his hands resting on the table. He looked very calm. I tried starting normal conversation just to break the tension. I talked about the drive over and mentioned the neighborhood looked nice. Nobody responded. Not a single person. A few of them leaned forward slightly like they were trying to see me better. One older man across the table adjusted his glasses and kept staring directly at my face. A woman standing near the wall tilted her head slowly like she was examining something. It started feeling less like dinner and more like some kind of inspection. I looked down at the table and noticed something that made the feeling worse. There were small pieces of paper near some of the plates. Little cards. A few of them had writing on them. Numbers. One said height. Another said age. Another said health. I felt this wave of confusion and fear building in my chest. I looked around again at the people watching me. Some of them were whispering quietly to each other now while still staring, like they were discussing something about me. One older woman stood up and slowly walked around the table. She stopped behind my chair. I could feel her eyes on the back of my head. Then she moved closer and looked down at my hands resting on the table. She studied them for several seconds. Then she walked away again without saying anything. Another man leaned forward and examined my face like he was trying to memorize every detail. The whole thing felt wrong in a way I could not explain. Not just awkward. Something worse. Like I had walked into something planned. Something I was not supposed to understand yet. Dylan finally looked at me again. His smile was still there, but it felt different now. Almost proud. Like he was presenting something valuable. The family continued whispering and watching. Some of them nodding slowly. Others writing things on the small cards. I realized then that nobody had touched the food. The plates were still empty. The dinner was not for eating yet. It felt more like everyone was waiting for some kind of decision. My heart started beating faster. I pushed my chair back slightly and said I needed to use the bathroom. For the first time since I arrived, several of them reacted. Their heads turned at the same time, watching me stand up. Dylan pointed down the hallway. I walked that way trying to stay calm even though every instinct in my body was telling me to leave. The bathroom door was halfway down the hall. But instead of going inside, I kept walking. Straight past it. Straight to the front door. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Nobody tried to stop me. But when I looked back once before stepping outside, the entire family was standing now. All of them watching me from the dining room. Completely silent. Like they were watching something walk away that they had been studying. I got into my car and drove away immediately. I never heard from Dylan again after that night. But sometimes I still think about that table. All those silent people. All those low cards with notes. And the way they looked at me like I was not a guest. More like something they were thinking about buying. It sounds stupid now, but when weird things happen, your mind tries really hard to explain them away before jumping to something scary. That night started like any other date I have had. Honestly, it was one of the better starts I have had from Tinder. No awkward waiting around, no weird energy, nothing like that. Her name on the app was Sarah. We had meshed a few days earlier and talked pretty casually. She liked walking around downtown areas at night, taking photos of random places, that kind of thing. That worked perfectly for me because I like photography too. Not professionally or anything, just taking pictures when I go places. So we planned something simple. Meet downtown near the Riverwalk area and just wander around for a bit. There are lots of lights there at night and some cool old buildings. I remember arriving early because I hate being the late one on a first date. I parked my car and waited near the bridge where we said we would meet. Around 8:10 p.m. she walked up. She looked exactly like her profile pictures. Dark hair, light jacket, small backpack slung over one shoulder. She smiled when she saw me and everything felt normal right away. No weird awkward pause. We just started walking down the path along the river. The whole area looked really nice that night. Street lights reflecting off the water, people walking their dogs, couples sitting on benches. Normal stuff. After about 10 minutes, we stopped near this old brick building that had a big mural painted on the side. It was one of those colorful street art things that everyone takes pictures with. I pulled out my phone automatically because that is what I always do when I see something interesting. She laughed a little and stepped near the wall. I took the first photo. It looked normal when I snapped it. She stood there smiling in front of the mural while the streetlight above cast a yellow glow across the wall. Nothing strange. But when I looked at the photo on my phone screen, it was not her. At least not the version of her standing in front of me. In the photo, the woman standing by the mural looked much older. Her hair was gray and thin. Her face was wrinkled and hollow around the cheeks. The jacket looked older too somehow, faded and worn out. For a second, I thought I accidentally opened an old photo in my gallery. So I looked up at Sarah. She was standing right there looking completely normal. Young, smiling. Same person from the app. Then I looked back down at the photo again. Still the old woman. My brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe the lighting was weird. Maybe the camera did something strange with the shadows. I turned the phone toward her to show her, but then I stopped halfway through because suddenly I felt embarrassed. What if it just looked weird to me and normal to everyone else? So I laughed it off and put my phone away. We kept walking. The conversation stayed relaxed. We talked about school, work, random things around the city. After a while, we reached a small plaza area with a fountain in the middle. There were colored lights under the water that made the whole place glow blue and purple. It looked great for photos. So again, I pulled out my phone. This time I asked if she wanted a picture together. She stood next to me and leaned in slightly while I held the phone up. I took the photo. The second I looked at it, my stomach dropped. Because again, the woman in the picture was not the one next to me. This time it looked worse. The woman in the photo looked extremely thin. Her skin looked pale and tight against her face. Her eyes were sunken and dark. The smile looked wrong too, stretched in a way that made it look almost painful. I looked up immediately. Sarah stood right next to me, normal as before. Healthy skin, normal face, normal smile. I looked back at the phone again. The thin, sickly woman stared out of the photo. That was the moment my brain started getting nervous. I quickly locked my phone and slid it into my pocket. For the next few minutes, I barely paid attention to the conversation because my mind kept replaying those images. Maybe my phone camera had some kind of filter turned on. Maybe the lighting made the shadows weird. I kept trying to explain it logically. We walked past a row of old shops with bright lights in the windows. One of them had a big mirror display that reflected the street. I glanced at our reflection as we walked. It looked completely normal. Her reflection matched the person next to me. That should have made me feel better. But the photos were still stuck in my head. About 20 minutes later, we stopped at a small overlook near the river where you could see the whole skyline. People were standing around taking pictures there too. Sarah leaned on the railing and looked out at the water. The lights from the buildings reflected across the surface. It actually looked really nice. Without thinking too much, I pulled out my phone again. I told myself I would take one more picture just to prove the earlier ones were camera glitches. She turned slightly toward me and smiled while the skyline glowed behind her. I took the photo. When I looked at the screen, my chest felt like it dropped through the ground. Because the person in the picture was barely human looking. The face looked decayed. Skin sagging and dark like something left outside too long. Patches missing around the cheeks. The mouth slightly open, showing dark gaps where teeth should have been. The eyes looked hollow. Not just tired or old. Hollow. Like deep, empty sockets. I stared at the photo for several seconds without breathing. Then I slowly looked up. Sarah stood in the exact same position. Perfectly normal. Looking at the water. Nothing wrong with her face at all. I looked back down at the phone again. The decayed face stared out of the screen. That's when my hand started shaking. I quickly swiped through the earlier photos. The first one with the mural now looked even worse. The old woman had deeper wrinkles and clouded eyes. The second photo of the fountain showed the thin, pale version again. 3 photos. 3 completely different versions of the same person. None of them matching the woman standing right next to me. My mind started racing through possible explanations. Camera glitch. Editing bug. Maybe someone hacked my phone. None of those ideas made sense. I looked up at Sarah again. She turned toward me with a small smile and asked if the photo looked good. I could not even answer right away, because the moment she turned toward me, the light from the street lamp hit her eyes in a strange way. For a split second, they looked darker than they should have. Almost hollow. Then the moment passed and they looked normal again. I forced myself to smile and said the picture looked fine. But inside my head, everything felt wrong. I did not take any more photos after that. We kept walking for another half hour, but my focus was completely gone. Every time I glanced at her face, I thought about the different versions in the photos. Old. Thin. Decayed. Almost skeletal. Finally, we reached the parking area where we had started. We said goodbye like a normal date ending. She smiled and thanked me for walking around with her. Then she got into her car and drove away. I sat in my own car for several minutes before leaving. My hands were still shaking. Once I got home, I opened my phone again and looked at the pictures. They were still there. The 3 different versions of her staring out of the screen. I tried showing them to a friend the next day. But the moment he looked at them, he said they just looked like normal photos of a girl standing by a mural and a fountain. Completely normal. He asked why I thought they looked strange. I did not know what to say. Because when I looked at them again after that, they looked normal too. Just Sarah smiling in different places. But every time I remember that night, I still see the other versions in my head. The old one. The thin one. And the last one by the river that barely looked alive. The first thing I lost that night was a memory about a red bicycle, and I did not even realize it was gone until later when I tried to remember it again. That is the part that still scares me the most. Not the guy. Not the restaurant. Not the way the night ended. The worst part is knowing there are pieces of my own life missing now and I can never get them back. The date started completely normal. Honestly, it was one of the calmer Tinder matches I had gotten in a while. Most conversations on there feel rushed or awkward, but this one felt slow in a good way. His name was Adam. His profile had simple photos. One hiking picture, one sitting at a table outside a cave, and another one where he was holding a dog that probably was not even his. His bio was short. It said he liked hearing people's stories. That sounded harmless enough. We talked for a few days. He asked a lot of questions, but not in a creepy way. More like he was curious about small details of people's lives. Eventually, he suggested dinner at a quiet place outside the busy part of the city. The restaurant was one of those smaller family-owned places that sits along a road with not much around it. Warm yellow lights inside, wooden tables, soft music playing somewhere in the background. When I walked in, he was already there sitting near the window. He looked pretty much like his photos. Tall, dark hair, calm face. He smiled when he saw me and stood up to greet me. Nothing strange. We sat down and started talking while we waited for the server. The first half of the conversation was completely normal. We talked about work, hobbies, random things we liked doing on weekends. Then after we ordered food, he asked something different. He asked me to tell a story from when I was little. Not a huge moment or anything important. Just a random memory from childhood. I laughed a little because it felt like a strange question for a first date, but I tried to think of something anyway. The first thing that popped into my head was a memory about a red bicycle I had when I was around 7 years old. I remember starting to explain how I got it and how I used to ride it around my street. The moment I finished telling the story, something odd happened. The memory faded. Not slowly either. It felt like someone had erased the picture from my mind. I could remember that I had just told the story, but when I tried to picture the bicycle again, the image was gone. I thought maybe my brain just got distracted. People forget small details all the time. So I ignored it. The food arrived, and we started eating. A few minutes later, he asked for another story. Again, something from when I was younger. Something about school or friends. I told him about a time in middle school when my class had a field day outside and my team lost every single game. It was not even a big memory, but I clearly remembered it while telling the story. The smell of grass. The loud whistles from the teachers. My friend laughing when we dropped the ball during one of the races. I finished the story and took a sip of my drink. Then it happened again. The entire memory disappeared. Not the idea of it, just the actual details. When I tried to picture the field or remember the names of the friends who were there, nothing showed up in my head, just blank space. I felt confused, but also slightly embarrassed. So I laughed it off and said my brain was probably tired. Adam watched me the whole time with his calm, interested look. He nodded slowly like everything was normal. Then he asked for another story. This one about my first pet. I told him about a small dog my family had when I was a kid. While I was describing it, I could clearly picture the dog running around the backyard and barking at birds. But the second I finished the story, the same thing happened. The image vanished. Completely. I sat there trying to remember what color the dog was, and suddenly I had no idea. My chest started feeling tight. I tried to pull the memory back, but it was like reaching for something that was not there anymore. Adam kept listening quietly while I struggled to think. He asked another question. Another childhood story, this time about a birthday party. I forced myself to tell one about a party when I turned 10. Cake, balloons, a friend spilling soda on the carpet. While I told it, the memory was clear in my mind. I could see the living room and hear the music playing from a small speaker. But the moment I finished talking, the memory vanished like the others. Completely gone. I stared down at the table trying to understand what was happening. 4 memories gone in less than 30 minutes. The server came by and asked if we wanted dessert. Adam said yes immediately. While we waited, he leaned back in his chair watching me carefully. He asked another question about my childhood, this time about the house where I grew up. I started explaining what it looked like, the shape of the front yard, the color of the walls. But halfway through the story, I felt the memory already starting to fade, like my brain knew what was about to happen. I rushed through the rest of it. The moment I stopped talking, the memory disappeared completely. I could not remember what the house looked like anymore. My breathing started getting faster. I tried to recall something simple like the street name where I grew up. Nothing. The space in my head where those details should have been felt empty. Dessert arrived at the table. A slice of cake and 2 forks. Adam looked calm and patient the entire time. He asked one more question, this time about my parents. A childhood story about them. I tried to answer, but something strange happened. I could not even start the story. I knew I had parents. I knew they existed. But the moment I tried to pull a specific memory from my head, it slipped away, like the others. I grabbed my phone from my bag, hoping something on it might trigger the memories again. Photos. Old messages. Anything. But the pictures from my childhood suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was looking at someone else's life. Adam watched me while I scrolled through my phone. He looked almost satisfied. The server came back and asked if we wanted anything else. I tried to respond, but suddenly another problem appeared. When she asked for my name for the receipt, I froze. I could remember my first name, but when I tried to think of my last name, nothing came to mind. My heart started pounding in my chest. I searched through my phone again, hoping to see it somewhere. Emails. Contacts. But my brain refused to connect the name to myself. It felt like looking at random words. Adam sat across from me, calmly eating the last bite of cake. Watching. Studying my face. By the time we left the restaurant, I could barely remember anything from before that evening. Just fragments. The red bicycle was gone. The dog was gone. The house. The school. The names of friends. All gone. And the worst part is, even now, writing this down later, I still cannot remember them. All I know is that every story I told him that night took something with it when it ended. It started as a normal night. I had gone out with someone from Tinder, just dinner and drinks, nothing fancy. The kind of first date that feels safe and boring enough that your brain relaxes. Her name was Claire. At least that was what she told me. She seemed nice, calm, and normal, the kind of girl who would laugh quietly at little jokes and sip her water slowly. We sat at a small table in a dimly lit bar downtown, the kind where the booths hug the walls and the music is soft enough that you can actually talk. We ordered food, talked about work, favorite shows, some stupid little stories from childhood. I was comfortable. I trusted her enough to check my phone without being rude. That's when it started. A notification popped up on my screen. You matched again. I frowned. I had not opened the app today. I did not even swipe. I tapped it out of curiosity. The profile pictures loaded. The girl in the photos looked familiar. Too familiar. It was not Claire. It was someone else. Someone I had dated before. A girl named Jenna, who vanished after a week of seeing each other. I had wondered if she just ghosted me, moved, or disappeared from my life in some normal, boring way. My stomach dropped, but I looked back at the table. Claire was still there, smiling, sipping her water, perfectly normal. I shook my head. It had to be a coincidence. Maybe a glitch in the app, a recycled photo from someone else's profile. Then the notification came again. You matched again. I ignored it. The phone buzzed a few more times, each notification the same. Each time, I opened it reluctantly. Each time, the profile picture showed a different woman I had dated in the past. Girls who had disappeared. Girls I had tried to contact but never heard back from. Girls I had almost forgotten. And each time I looked up, Claire was still sitting there. The same calm face, the same quiet smile. My hands started sweating. I put the phone down and tried to focus on dinner. I told myself to breathe, to ignore it. Maybe the app was haunted. Maybe I was losing my mind. Whatever it was, I could not let it ruin the night. We finished the food. The bartender had turned the lights dimmer, and as the night got later, a few other people were scattered around the bar, nothing unusual. And then it happened again. You matched again. I glanced at the notification, heart pounding. The profile picture was Samantha, the girl I dated last year who vanished after a weekend trip. The girl I had called and texted but had no answers. The girl I thought I would never see again. I looked back at Claire. The same expression, the same calm face. My fingers shook. I did not know how to explain what I was seeing. Then I noticed something worse. The timestamp on each profile picture changed. It updated in real time. It was not an old profile. It was active. Right now. I started checking my messages from the app. All the notifications were sent to me specifically. No one else. Every new notification said, "You matched again," and each one showed a girl I had known, a girl I had dated, a girl who disappeared. I tried to speak to Claire, tried to ask her about it, anything. She just smiled the same calm smile. No response. Not even a small pause. She just kept looking at me like she knew. I picked up my phone again. This time it showed a profile I had completely forgotten. A girl from 3 years ago. The first girl I ever met through that app. She had disappeared after a week as well. My stomach turned. My fingers hovered over the screen, frozen. I realized then the pattern. Every girl who appeared in the notifications had disappeared shortly after I saw them. Every single one. I looked back at Claire. The same expression, unnervingly calm. I tried to leave. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. But when I glanced at her, her face was closer than it should have been. Her eyes fixed on me in a way that made my knees feel weak. The notifications continued. You matched again. I looked at the screen. The latest profile picture was Claire. Only it was not her face exactly. It was her face, but older, decayed around the edges. A shadowy version of her sitting in the same bar, same table, smiling at me. My heart raced. I backed away, fumbling with my chair. The phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another woman I had dated, another one gone. I realized something then. She was somehow connected, somehow tied to all of them. She was here, sitting across from me, but she was not just Claire. She had been every single one of them. I tried to throw the phone on the table. The notifications kept coming, buzzing, lighting up the screen. I stood and ran, down the narrow alley behind the bar, avoiding the few people who were leaving. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely breathe. I looked down at the phone for a moment. Another notification, you matched again. I stopped cold. The picture on the screen was Claire. Normal, smiling, just like she had been at the table. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe the app was broken. Maybe I was hallucinating. I walked home, phone in hand, heart still hammering. The next day, I opened the app again. Notifications. Every girl I had dated. Every girl who disappeared. Each one flickering in the profile pictures like they were alive, staring at me from behind the screen. I deleted the app, deleted the account, wiped everything. But the notifications kept coming, buzzing from nowhere. The phone would light up. The same alert. You matched again. Every time I see the notification, I know it is her. Sitting there, calm, smiling across from me. The one who has been all of them. The one who has been waiting. I thought it was just a casual night. Nothing special, just meeting someone from Tinder to hang out at his place. Normally I avoid first date house visits, but something about him made me think it would be okay. Maybe it was the way he talked about cooking or the calm way he answered my messages. His name was Nate. He lived a little outside the city in one of those older houses where every window has heavy curtains and the front yard is overgrown just enough to feel private. The house itself looked fine. Kind of small, 2 stories, brick exterior with ivy climbing part of the walls. When I walked in, It smelled like old wood mixed with something floral, like air freshener that had been left on too long. He greeted me casually and led me to the living room. It was comfortable, with mismatched furniture, a couch covered in a knitted blanket, and a few framed pictures on the walls. Nothing out of the ordinary. We talked for a while, watched a show on the TV, ate some snacks he had out. Normal first date stuff. Then, in a moment that seemed innocent at first, he said he wanted to show me his basement. He made it sound proud, like it was a special feature of the house. I hesitated. Basements are usually kind of weird. Dark, cramped, weird smells, but he smiled and insisted, said it would be fun. Curiosity got the better of me, so I followed him. The stairs were narrow, wooden, creaking under every step. The air grew colder as we went down, the kind of chill that makes your skin crawl a little. I tried to convince myself it was just the temperature difference. He flicked on a light at the bottom. The bulb hummed and threw harsh yellow light across the room. What I saw made me stop in my tracks. Dozens of mannequins were lined up along the walls and scattered across the center of the basement. At first glance, it looked normal enough. Mannequin heads, blank faces, the generic plastic kind you see in store displays. Then I noticed the clothes. The clothes were identical to what I was wearing. Not similar. Identical. The same jacket, the same top, the same pants, the same shoes. Everything. I stepped closer, trying to convince myself my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they were just similar colors. I walked past the first row. Every mannequin had the same outfit. Some had scarves. Some had jackets zipped differently, but everything matched. Then I noticed the small details. My necklace, the bracelet on my wrist, even my hair tied back the way I had it tonight. Some mannequins had hair that looked exactly like mine, tied the same way. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest. Nate was watching me from the corner of the room. He looked calm, almost proud, like he had shown this to countless other people, and this reaction was exactly what he expected. I wanted to back away to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. He started talking about how he collected clothes and mannequins, how he liked replicating the outfits of people he admired. His tone was casual, like he was showing me his stamp collection. I tried to make sense of it. Mannequins with clothes similar to mine were one thing. Mannequins with hair and details identical to mine were another. My stomach started turning. The room felt smaller with every second I stayed there. The mannequins' blank faces seemed to stare at me from every angle. I walked past another row and realized the mannequins were positioned as if they were doing things I had done today. One leaned slightly forward like it had been sitting at the couch. Another had an arm out as if reaching for a snack. The air smelled faintly of dust and something metallic. Maybe paint or rust. It was hard to tell, but it made my throat dry. I wanted to speak, ask why, to demand he explain, but no words came out. My mind was spinning too fast. He moved closer, gesturing for me to look at another section of the basement. More mannequins. This time, it looked like a line of people waiting for something. Their positions matched postures I had seen myself take throughout the night. The same hand gestures, the same stance. Then I noticed the tiniest details. Small blemishes on the arms of some mannequins matched marks on my skin. My fingernail scratches, tiny cuts, even a faint bruise I had on my wrist. Every detail was replicated perfectly. I stumbled backward, trying to comprehend how this was possible. Nate was still talking, still calm, describing how he had started collecting after meeting people he felt connected to. He called it art, an appreciation, a preservation. I realized then that he was not talking about me casually. He had prepared this. He had prepared it for me. I tried to move toward the stairs, toward the door. The room felt enormous, like it was stretching farther back than it should have. Every step I took made the shadows around the mannequin seem longer. My phone was in my pocket. I wanted to call someone, anyone. But when I pulled it out, the basement light made the screen glare. I could barely see anything. And when I turned the camera on, the mannequins looked different. The hair seemed more lifelike. The faces seemed slightly softer, like they had been alive at some point. I dropped the phone in shock. The camera bounced off the concrete floor, and when I looked down, one mannequin had turned its head slightly toward me. My heart skipped. I could have sworn it had been looking somewhere else before. I grabbed my bag and ran. The stairs were narrow, my feet tripping on the wood. I could hear Nate behind me, still calm, telling me to slow down, showing me more. I did not stop. I reached the front door and pulled it open. The cold night air hit me like a wave. I ran across the small yard and did not look back until I was in my car. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove away as fast as possible. The images from that basement stayed with me. The mannequins, the identical outfits, the hair, the marks, the lifelike stances. Every detail was burned into my memory. Later, when I tried to explain it to friends, they laughed nervously, assumed I was exaggerating. Mannequins in a basement, who cared to write? But it was not the same. Every time I see mannequins in stores now, I feel my chest tighten. Every time I see a display, my mind fills with images of that basement. The rows and rows of people who look like me. And the thing that terrifies me the most is thinking about how long he had been preparing it, how many details he had noticed, how many nights spent collecting pieces of me without my knowledge. I never went back to Tinder after that, never checked messages, never told Nate where I lived. But the memory of the basement, the mannequins, and that perfect replication of me will never leave. I always thought I was fine with first dates. Most of the time, they were awkward, boring, or forgettable. But that night was different. Her name was Lisa. I matched with her on Tinder after a few days of chatting. She seemed funny, interesting, normal. The kind of girl who could keep up with a conversation without making it weird. At least, that's what I thought. We agreed to meet at a small restaurant downtown. Not fancy, nothing trendy, just a place with good lighting, decent food, and a quiet atmosphere. I figured it would make conversation easier, not having people shouting over music or a busy bar. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting at a corner table, smiling in a way that made me think she had been waiting and was genuinely excited to see me. At first, everything seemed normal. She ordered a drink, I ordered mine. We started talking about work, hobbies, stupid shows we liked. Then it started. She laughed at one of my jokes, a normal laugh at first, short and light. I smiled. It felt nice. Then she laughed again, a little louder. Then again, longer this time. And I noticed something strange. It was way too long, too loud. Not in a crowded bar loud, just loud enough that it seemed to fill the room. At first, I thought maybe it was just enthusiasm. Maybe she had a really big laugh. But then I noticed the other tables. The restaurant was not busy, but a few couples were sitting nearby. They did not react at all. No one looked up. No one smiled. No one even flinched at the sound. Her laugh was clearly loud enough to be heard, yet no one else seemed to notice. I tried to brush it off. Maybe the acoustics were weird. Maybe it just carried strangely toward our table. But every joke I made, every little thing I said, her laugh grew louder, longer, more intense. It started to echo in my head like a ringing sound that would not stop. I noticed my stomach twisting. It was not discomfort from nerves. It was something else. Something in the way the sound felt sharp, hollow, and invasive. She laughed at a small story about my childhood dog. Her laugh stretched longer than it should have, filling the room but strangely empty at the same time. I glanced around. No one else reacted. The waiter walked by, oblivious. A couple eating pasta at another table did not even glance our way. I blinked, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Maybe my brain was exaggerating. But her laugh continued. Every time she laughed, it felt a small vibration through the floor, through the chairs, through my chest. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but enough to make me tense. I started noticing other details, her eyes, not just bright, but sharp, almost predatory, and her smile, the kind that stretches a little too wide, just beyond comfortable. She laughed again at something stupid I said about a broken toaster. Too long, too loud. Then she stopped suddenly. Her face went calm, serene, and I noticed the words she whispered, not out loud, but somehow I heard them. Only the ones who are about to die hear my laugh. I froze. My throat closed. My hands were on the table, trembling. The restaurant felt too quiet, as if everyone had vanished except for her and me. I looked around, the couples, the waiter, the faint music from the speakers. All of it looked normal, but I could not shake the feeling. I was the only one hearing it. The laugh was gone, but the echo remained in my head, the kind of echo that makes you question your sanity. She smiled at me again, calm, like nothing had happened, polite, almost innocent. I tried to keep the night going, tried to order dessert, talk about normal things. But every time I tried to focus, I could hear the laugh again in my mind, stretching, lingering. I thought maybe it was my imagination, maybe I was overreacting. But then I noticed the waiter again. He brought a plate over, smiled at her like he recognized her. His face froze for a split second, subtle, but I noticed it. And I started to realize the pattern. Every time she laughed, only I could hear it. And every time she laughed at something specific, it was like a marker, a signal. I remembered a news story from a few weeks ago about a man who had died suddenly in a cafe, right after someone laughed loudly at a nearby table. I laughed it off at first for ridiculous coincidence, but then the image stayed in my head. I tried to excuse myself, said I needed to make a call, go to the bathroom, anything to leave. She nodded, still calm, still smiling. The moment I left my chair, I could hear her laugh again. Soft this time, under the threshold, barely audible, but it filled the air around me. I ran to the restroom, locked the door, stared at myself in the mirror, tried to calm down, tried to tell myself I was overreacting. But then I realized the laugh was in my head, the vibration, the ringing, the echo. I could feel it lingering in my chest. I opened the door. The restaurant looked normal. People eating, talking, music playing. No sign of anything strange. I walked back to the table slowly. She smiled, waited patiently. The laugh came again, soft, curling around my ears. I knew then it was not normal. It was not a trick of acoustics. It was her. Somehow it was her. I tried to finish the night, pay the bill, leave without looking at her too long. Every step felt like moving through thick air. As I walked out, she laughed one last time, just loud enough for me to hear, echoing in my head. I got in my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The laugh stayed in my head all the way home, longer than it should have, stretching, curling, twisting around every thought. I still do not know what it was, whether she was a person, something else, or if my brain had snapped entirely. All I know is the sound, that laugh, and the words I cannot get out of my mind. Only the ones who are about to die hear my laugh. Ever since that night, every time I hear laughter, even faint, even normal, I tense up. I cannot stop thinking about her, about that sound, about what it meant. The memory of that night is not gone. It sits with me, echoing louder than any normal laugh ever should. I thought online dating was supposed to be awkward but harmless. A few swipes, some messages, and maybe a drink with someone new. I never thought it would turn into the kind of night that makes you question reality. His name was Mark. His profile was nothing unusual. Funny enough, a little self-deprecating, pictures hiking, and at coffee shops. He messaged me, we laughed over text for a couple of days, and then we set up a casual evening date. Somewhere public, nothing weird. I thought I was being careful. He picked me up from my apartment, and the first thing I noticed was how calm he seemed. The kind of calm that doesn't bother most people, but it made me uneasy. He had this slow, deliberate way of moving, the kind that makes you notice every little motion. We drove to a little diner a few miles away. It was empty except for a few regulars at the counter. He parked. We walked in, and everything seemed normal. He grabbed a booth near the window. I started talking, trying to keep it light, normal. We joked about work, classes, the weird trends on social media. Then he opened the door again. At first, I didn't notice. I was mid-sentence about how terrible my cooking skills were. Then I saw it. The dog. It was exactly like my childhood dog, Bruno. Not just a similar breed, not just the same color, but Bruno. The same little scar on his left ear, the way he trotted with a slightly limp back leg, the way his tail curled at the end. Bruno had died 15 years ago. I was a kid. We buried him in the backyard after a long illness. I had never forgotten him, but it had been years since I even thought about him. And here he was, patting gently into the diner, sniffing at our table, tail wagging like nothing had ever happened. I froze. My fork slipped from my hand. My words died in my throat. Mark smiled at me, calm, casual, and said something that made my blood run cold. He claimed he had borrowed him from where I'll be going soon. The words didn't make sense at first. I blinked, trying to process. He repeated them slowly, like I was supposed to understand. The diner seemed to shift around me. The lighting felt colder. The few other people inside didn't react. Bruno padded to my side, nuzzling my hand. I wanted to scream, to reach out, but the dog felt real, alive, impossibly alive. I looked up at Mark. His calm, steady gaze made my chest tighten. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't smile nervously. He was completely composed. I tried to ask questions, tried to figure out how this was possible. Maybe a twin. Maybe someone trained a dog to act like Bruno. Maybe my mind was playing tricks after all these years. But nothing added up. Every detail matched perfectly. The scar, the limp, even the way he tilted his head when he looked at me, just like Bruno used to do. Mark reached under the table and patted the dog. Bruno wagged his tail. I wanted to stand, run, leave. But I couldn't. I felt glued to the booth, my mind spinning. He told me how he could get animals from places I would go soon, how he could borrow them before they were gone. I didn't understand exactly what he meant. It sounded impossible, like a story from some old folklore. But the dog, Bruno, was proof. Proof that something unnatural was happening. Proof that he could reach into time and memory in ways I couldn't comprehend. I kept trying to think rationally. Maybe he meant he rescued dogs from shelters and trained them to mimic the owner's memories. Maybe he had photos. Maybe this was all some elaborate trick. But Bruno sat there, looked at me with the same old eyes, and I couldn't breathe. I thought about the backyard 15 years ago. How small I was. How scared I had been when he got sick. How my parents tried to explain death to me. Bruno had been gone for years, and now he was here alive. Impossibly alive. Mark kept smiling. Calm, composed, like nothing about this was unusual. The diner remained quiet. No one looked up. Bruno rested his head on my lap, tail thumping gently. I wanted to touch him, to confirm he was real. I reached out slowly. The fur was soft, warm, breathing steady, alive, but wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't define. He told me about borrowing Bruno, how he could get anything I had loved, anyone I had loved. The words made no sense, but my mind understood. He had power or access to something beyond life and memory. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. I couldn't stop looking at Bruno, couldn't stop listening to Mark's calm explanations. I tried to make sense of the timeline. 15 years. 15 years Bruno had been gone, and here he was, alive. The smell of his fur, the sound of his breathing, the soft nudge of his nose. It was real, but it felt like a dream. I wondered if this was just the start, if he could borrow more than animals, if he could borrow people, memories, pieces of the past I thought were gone forever. I realized I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't think. The world around me felt smaller. Everything was tighter, heavier. He suggested taking Bruno outside, letting me see him more, interact. He made it sound like a gift, a present, a chance to relive something lost. But I couldn't. My gut screamed, mine screamed. Everything inside me screamed to run. When I finally got my voice, I asked him why. Why me, why Bruno, why now? He smiled the same calm smile and said something about borrowing from where I'll be going soon, like it was perfectly normal. I didn't stay for dessert. I didn't finish the coffee. I left the diner with Bruno trailing behind, alive, real, impossible. The drive home was tense. Every moment I half expected Bruno to vanish, half expected the world to tilt sideways. Every time I blinked, he was still there, looking up at me with those old familiar eyes. I got home, locked the door. Bruno lay at my feet, tail thumping, like nothing was wrong, but everything was wrong. I tried to call my parents to confirm details. Yes, Bruno had died 15 years ago. Yes, we buried him in the backyard. Yes, I was sure of every detail. I tried to convince myself it was a twin dog, a rescue, something explainable, but nothing matched. The scar, the limp, the way he tilted his head, the way he knew me, remembered me. I stopped trying to rationalize. I couldn't. The only thing I could do was stare at him, feel the warmth, listen to the breathing, and wonder how long it would last. How long Mark had control over what was borrowed. How far back he could reach. How he knew me. I did not go back on Tinder. I did not answer messages. I did not leave the apartment again that night. I sat with Bruno, alive, impossibly alive, and wondered what it meant to have the past stolen and returned like this. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized that if he could borrow Bruno, he could borrow anything. Anyone. And maybe eventually it would not just be a dog. I didn't think much about it at first. I was just sitting there at this tiny diner off some side street I'd never noticed before, waiting for her. She picked the place that it had vibes. The kind of vibe that makes you think maybe you're in a movie nobody else is watching. The booths were old, the lights flickered every few seconds, and the smell of fries was way too strong, like it was trying to choke out everything else. I kept checking my phone, scrolling through nothing because that's what you do when you're trying to look casual, but you're actually anxious. She showed up right on time, waiting like she knew me already, and I smiled back because what else do you do? We sat down. The menu felt sticky under my fingers. I noticed her eyes were sharp, like they were looking right through me, but in a fun way at first. We ordered, talked about stupid stuff like movies and music, and I was thinking, this isn't bad. Maybe this will be okay. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I frowned because I don't usually answer unknown numbers. I glanced at her. She was laughing at something I said, not noticing me, and curiosity got the better of me. I answered. My own voice came out of the speaker, low, hurried, almost frantic. It told me not to trust her, not to sit there. Get out now. I laughed at first, assuming some kind of weird prank. I hung up and shook my head, trying to tell myself I was imagining it. But then it buzzed again, same unknown number. Same voice, same urgent message, almost louder this time, like it was desperate for me to understand. I tried to ignore it. I told myself phones glitch, calls get messed up. I focused on her, trying to push the thought away. But every time she leaned in, smiling, the phone would vibrate again. And every time the voice sounded more real, more like me, and more panicked. I started noticing small things about her that didn't make sense. The way her eyes would follow me even when I looked away, the way she asked questions I hadn't answered yet, like she knew. I tried to make a joke about my phone acting up, but the words stuck in my throat when she tilted her head, smiling like she knew something. Then she reached across the table, hand brushing mine, and the phone buzzed again. I answered automatically because I needed to hear it, to make sure I wasn't going insane. The voice whispered this time, barely audible, telling me the same thing, warning me. It said she's not who she seems, that I needed to leave before it's too late. I looked at her, then really looked. Her smile hadn't changed, but there was something in her eyes that wasn't playful anymore. Something I couldn't name, some coldness behind the warmth. I wanted to leave, I really did. But I didn't want to cause a scene, didn't want to freak out in front of the diner. So I stayed pretending to laugh, pretending to be interested, but my heart was hammering so hard I thought she could hear it. I tried to text a friend, anyone to come get me, but my phone wouldn't send anything. The screen flickered and then went black. The unknown number kept calling, and I couldn't answer without hearing myself telling me to run, to not trust her. Every time I looked at her, she seemed closer, like she crossed an invisible line without moving. I don't even know how to describe it. The air around her felt heavy, pressing down on my chest, and my head was spinning from the calls and the feeling that something was horribly wrong. She ordered dessert, picking something I hadn't even looked at, and smiled at me while taking the bite. The kind of smile that should have been normal, but it felt wrong. Her hand touched my arm lightly, but it was enough to send an electric jolt up my spine. My phone buzzed again, and I answered, voice shaking this time. The call was longer, the voice frantic, telling me she wasn't human, that she'd been waiting, that I have to get out before she notices I know. I wanted to throw the phone across the diner, I wanted to run, I wanted to disappear, but the diner felt like it had shrunk, like the walls were moving in. Every minute felt like an hour. She talked, and I nodded, pretending to be normal, pretending to eat, pretending to enjoy this date that had turned into some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I glanced around the diner, hoping someone would notice something, anyone at all, but it was empty. Like the world outside had disappeared and we were stuck in some private hell. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it's a scam, maybe I've been pranked by someone online, but nothing made sense. The way she smiled, the way the phone kept calling, my own voice trying to warn me, it didn't fit into any kind of rational explanation. I felt trapped, like I was inside a snow globe, and she was the one shaking it, making everything spin. I pretended to excuse myself to the bathroom. I walked fast, almost running, phone in hand, ready to answer if it rang. But when I stopped, leaning against the bathroom wall, my stomach twisted. The unknown number called again. I answered automatically, and the voice was screaming this time, urgent and panicked, saying get out. Don't trust her. She's not alone. I froze, because what the hell does that even mean? Not alone. I walked back slowly, trying to act calm, heart thudding, palms sweating. She was sitting there staring at me like she'd been expecting me to come back. The booth felt smaller, the air thicker. I wanted to yell, to run, but my legs felt like lead. I sat down and smiled weakly, trying to act like nothing was wrong. Then she leaned in closer. I noticed it this time. The way her shadow moved against the wall, the way it didn't match her movements perfectly. Like it was mimicking her, but not quite right. My phone buzzed again. I answered, voice trembling, hearing myself tell me to leave, to not sit there, to never look at her the same way again. And as I looked at her, smiling, her hand reached for mine again. I realized I couldn't tell anyone about this, because who would believe that your own voice is calling you to warn you about the person sitting across the table? I realized that even if I ran, even if I left, the voice might not stop, and maybe she'd follow. I stayed there. I didn't have a choice, or maybe I didn't have the courage to move. She kept smiling, the phone kept buzzing, and I kept hearing myself warning me over and over. I kept eating, talking, nodding, but my mind was screaming, trying to make sense of it. And for some reason, I knew she was enjoying it, every second of it, knowing I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape. Hours passed, maybe only minutes. I don't know. The diner lights flickered, the shadows moved, and every time the phone rang, I answered, and every time I heard my own voice, I realized that no one could save me. I was stuck, and the world outside didn't exist anymore. There was only her, only me, and only my voice screaming a warning that I couldn't act on without making it worse. I still go back to that diner sometimes. Not to eat, not to see her, but to try to understand. The booths are empty. The fries still smell overpowering, and sometimes when my phone buzzes, I hesitate to answer. Because every time I do, I hear myself again, telling me not to trust someone who could be sitting right across from me, smiling and waiting for me to fall apart. And maybe she's always there, maybe she's not. But I know that if I ever hear that voice again, I'll answer because I have to. And I'll never sit down across from her again. I thought it was going to be a normal night. I dressed up, tried not to look too excited, grabbed my coat, and walked to the bar where I was meeting him. It was one of those old neighborhood bars that looked dead from the outside but had a kind of warmth inside. Dim lights, old wood, faint smell of whiskey, and spilled beer. I got there early because I like to scope the place out before anyone shows up. I ordered a drink, sat at the end of the bar, and stared at the mirror behind it. Big, cracked in one corner, the kind that looks like it's been around since forever. I didn't think much of it. He showed up later casual, like he belonged there. I waved him over, and he smiled. I felt that weird nervous flutter, the one you get on first dates when everything is new and uncertain. We talked, laughed a little, the usual. He ordered a drink, and I noticed how he leaned on the bar, his reflection supposed to be right behind him in the mirror. But it wasn't. I blinked, thinking I must be imagining it. I leaned slightly, trying to catch it from another angle. The mirror was old, scratched, maybe even warped, but didn't explain why there was no reflection of him at all. I frowned and then pointed it out, like maybe the bartender would think it was funny, like some weird trick with glass. But the bartender didn't laugh. He froze. Eyes wide, fingers stiff on a glass he had been polishing. I felt a chill even though the place was warm, like someone had turned the thermostat down 100 degrees. I looked back at the mirror. My reflection was still there, smiling, holding my drink. I stared at him, then the bartender. And suddenly, my reflection vanished. Not a shadow, not a blur, gone. I stared at the glass, trying to understand. It's a bar. Mirrors get weird, right? Maybe the light, maybe my eyes playing tricks. But the panic in the bartender's face told me it wasn't a trick. I felt it first in my chest, a tightness I couldn't explain, like my lungs were shrinking. Then in my stomach, but the floor had dropped out from under me. I looked out at my hands, then back at him. Still nothing in the mirror. No reflection, no distortion, just empty glass. The bartender started moving frantically, pointing at the mirror, muttering to himself, wiping the glass with a rag that made no sound. I realized then he was scared of what he was seeing, not me. I wanted to leave, to run out into the street, but my body didn't listen. It felt like I was frozen in place, sitting there with a guy whose reflection didn't exist and a bartender who was losing it. I tried to speak, to explain, to get someone to make sense of it, but no words came up. I wanted to reach out and touch the glass to see if it was broken or dirty or hiding something, but my arms felt heavy, almost like they belonged to someone else. The bar didn't feel normal anymore. The lights seemed dimmer, shadows stretching across the floor, long and strange, not matching anything in the room. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud, echoing in my ears, but there was something else too. A kind of faint humming, almost like a voice under the music, low, vibrating through the wooden floor. I looked around, trying to find it, but there was nothing. Just him sitting there, smile still in place, and the bartender, shaking, eyes darting between the mirror and the empty floor in front of it. I thought maybe it was a trick, a prank, a setup for some viral video. I mean, bars do weird things sometimes, right? But nothing explained the panic in the bartender's face or the complete lack of reflection. I could feel myself getting lightheaded, like my brain couldn't process what was happening. The guy smiled at me again, leaning back in his chair casual, like nothing was wrong. But I knew it was wrong. I tried to stand up. My legs moved, but it felt like walking through water, slow, resistance everywhere. I felt the air in the bar shift, like it was thicker all of a sudden, and I realized my reflection wasn't the only thing gone. The bartender was gone too. He wasn't behind the bar anymore. I turned, searching, and saw him crouched near the mirror, hands pressed against the glass like he was trying to hold it together. His mouth moved, muttering something I couldn't hear over the sound of my own panic. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about him. It was about me. About all of us. The mirror wasn't broken. It wasn't dirty. It was showing me the truth, something I couldn't explain, something my brain refused to accept. I looked at him again, and he was smiling, frozen in that way that doesn't make sense, like he's not really there but is all at once. I wanted to scream, but my voice didn't work. My throat felt tight, constricted, like it had been sewn shut by some invisible force. I tried to move closer, to touch the glass, to find some kind of solid proof that I was still real, that this wasn't happening. But the closer I got, the more distorted everything became. Shadows in the corners stretched further, the lights above flickered faster, and the humming under the music got louder and louder until it was deafening in my head. I felt like I was spinning, falling, being pulled into the mirror itself. And in the reflection, the empty glass stared back at me, showing nothing, no one, just a blank space where I should have been. I realized then that the guy across from me had never had a reflection. Not a trick of the light. Not a weird angle. He wasn't real. And whatever that meant, whatever he was, it had infected the space around him. The bartender's panic, my own disappearance from the mirror, it was all connected. I felt like the walls of the bar were bending, breathing, shifting to hold me in place, to make me part of it. I could see movement in the corners of my eyes, shadows that didn't belong, stretching toward me, trying to pull me into the glass where he had no reflection, but I did. Or did I? I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? Time didn't exist anymore. I just sat, staring at nothing, waiting for something to happen, and the guy smiled the same way, unchanging, permanent. The bar became quiet. The music faded. The hum was gone. But I could still feel it. The emptiness in the mirror, the impossible absence, and the knowledge that I shouldn't be able to see him there, shouldn't be able to sit across from him like this. My body shook. My hands trembled. But I couldn't move, couldn't leave, couldn't even speak. At some point, the bartender disappeared completely, pulled into the mirror, maybe, or maybe he just ran. I don't know. I only know that I stayed, watching, trapped, seeing him, feeling the absence, and knowing that when anyone else looked, nothing would be there. Just the bar, just the glass, just the reflectionless figure across from me. And now I sit here months later, thinking about it, remembering the bar, the mirror, and that face that shouldn't exist. I don't tell anyone. People would laugh, say it's stress, imagination, whatever. But I know what I saw. I know that he's out there waiting in some place that isn't real, smiling across a glass, waiting for the next person to sit down. And I know that if I ever go back, I won't exist either, not in the reflection, not in the world they show to other people. I'll just be gone, swallowed into the emptiness, staring back at someone who has no reflection, but everything else. I thought first dates were supposed to be awkward but harmless. I picked her up from this little coffee shop downtown, nothing fancy, just something casual so we could talk without pressure. She was already waiting outside, leaning against the wall, scrolling on her phone, hair falling over her face in a way that made me think she knew she looked good and didn't care if I noticed. I waved, she looked up, smiled, and I felt that first date nervous excitement hit me in my chest like it was going to give me a heart attack. We walked around the block first, just talking. Nothing heavy, mostly jokes and small talk. I noticed she kept glancing at her phone, but not texting, just looking. I didn't think anything of it. She suggested we grab an Uber to somewhere else, said she knew a spot that was better, and I agreed without question, thinking she had a plan and maybe it would be fun. She ordered it, we got into the car, and I slid into the seat behind the driver, expecting the usual casual ride. The car was quiet, the hum of the engine, the low glow of the dashboard lights, and then the driver said her name. Not a greeting, not asking if she was comfortable. Just her name, clearly like he was expecting her. Then he added something that froze me in place. He asked if the last one screamed too much. My stomach dropped, my mind instantly looping through what that could even mean. She turned to look at him, smiling as if it was a joke, and said nothing. I kept my eyes forward, staring out the window at the street lights and empty sidewalks, trying to convince myself I'd misheard. The city lights blurred past, but my heart kept hammering. I wanted to say something, to ask her how the driver knew her, to demand an explanation, but the words got stuck in my throat. She didn't seem concerned, though. She leaned back in her seat, scrolling on her phone like this was a normal thing. My hands started shaking slightly, gripping the edge of the seat. Every nerve in my body was screaming that this was wrong. I noticed other things I hadn't before. The way she gave the driver a look that didn't belong in public, like there was some shared secret. The way her smile seemed tighter, almost forced. My brain was trying to piece together why a stranger would know her name and reference something that sounded violent. I told myself it had to be a weird coincidence, some strange mix-up. But the words, "did the last one scream too much," kept echoing in my head like a chant. The car turned onto a road that I didn't recognize, further away from the city lights. The street lights became sparse. The buildings vanished, replaced by empty lots and darkened houses. I started asking her where we were going, casual at first, trying not to panic, but she didn't answer. She just smiled again, that smile that didn't reach her eyes, and tapped her phone. The driver didn't say anything else, just kept driving. I started noticing other small things about the car. There were scratches on the dashboard, fingerprints in the dust, and a faint smell that made my stomach twist. I tried to ignore it, focus on the conversation we had earlier, anything to anchor myself to reality. But then I saw it, a faint stain on the seat behind the driver, something that shouldn't be there. My mind tried to rationalize it, like maybe it was spilled coffee or something, but it didn't smell like coffee. The further we drove, the more tense the air became. The quiet was thick, oppressive, like the car itself was alive and watching. I noticed she wasn't looking at me anymore, wasn't checking her phone either. She was staring straight ahead, expression blank. I wanted to turn around, see the driver's face, but the rearview mirror reflected nothing but shadows. I started to realize the driver wasn't human in any way I could define. His face was normal enough, his hands normal, but the way he moved, the way he spoke her name, it didn't match reality. I tried to come up with excuses in my head, reasons to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe she had friends who were messing with me. Maybe I was losing it. But the car kept moving, the roads kept twisting into darkness, and the driver kept glancing at her like he was studying her, like she was something to be evaluated. And then it clicked. The phrase he said. Did the last one scream too much? That wasn't a joke. That wasn't small talk. That was a warning. Or maybe it was a question after something had already happened. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but every time I opened my mouth, my tongue felt heavy, like it had been glued down. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't grab the door handle. It was like the car itself was holding me in place, and the further we went, the more I realized that there was no way out that didn't involve her. She wasn't panicked, she wasn't scared, she was calm. Too calm. We turned onto a road with no lights, no markings, just darkness on either side, and I started noticing shapes in the trees, shadows that didn't make sense. I told myself it was my imagination, but the shapes moved, just enough to notice if I looked directly. I tried to calm myself, tried to think about something else, but the phrase the driver said kept repeating in my head. And then I understood. This wasn't a normal ride. This wasn't a normal date. This wasn't even a place that existed on a map. The car stopped. I realized I hadn't felt it stop, hadn't noticed the motion cease. I looked up at the driver, and for the first time I noticed his eyes. Not human, black at the edges, glowing faintly and fixed on her. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. She turned to me then, that smile still there, cold, and I understood that the driver didn't know her like a person. He knew her like she belonged to him or to something else, like she was part of a chain that I had just been caught in. The smell in the car got stronger. Metallic, sharp like blood. My stomach lurched. I realized I was trapped, sitting next to someone who wasn't human in any sense I could understand, being driven to a place that shouldn't exist, and the driver and her shared a secret that I wasn't part of. I tried to make sense, tried to bargain in my head, tried to picture the world outside the car, the city, my apartment, my life, anything. But the darkness outside the window swallowed it all. She tapped her phone, and the driver said something else in a low tone I couldn't make out. She nodded, calm as if he had asked permission for something ordinary. That's when I noticed the glove compartment was open, empty, like it had never contained anything. The dashboard lights flickered once, then died, leaving only the faint glow of the moon outside. I started shaking, trying to pull the door handle, trying to make sense, and realized with a sinking heart that the locks were different, unbreakable, like they weren't made for this world. The air got thick, heavy, suffocating, and I could feel a pulse through the car, through the seats, the steering wheel, through me. I tried to speak, to plead, to beg, but my voice was gone. I tried to move, to push her out of the way, to open the door, but I was stuck. She was calm, smiling, tapping on her phone, and the driver, that thing, kept staring at her like she was the center of a storm I had no right to survive. The car started moving again, slowly, deliberately, and I realized we were headed somewhere I didn't want to know, somewhere I wouldn't get out of. The road became a tunnel of shadows, darkness folding in from the sides, the air thick and alive. I understood that this was never a ride. It was never a date. It was a trap, a chain, a pattern I had stumbled into by being stupid enough to trust her. I don't remember how long we drove. Minutes, hours, I don't know. Time stopped. I just sat there gripping the seat, watching her tap on her phone, watching the driver glance at her, and realizing that I was just another person in a string of people that had come before me. The phrase repeated in my head, louder this time, echoing off the walls of my skull. The last one screamed too much, and I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to exist in the next moment if it meant becoming part of that chain. And then the car stopped again. Nothing happened. I just sat there, still alive, still frozen, and understood that the ride wasn't over. That being here was not optional. That whatever she was, whatever they were, had plans that I couldn't escape by thinking or moving or even breathing. I could feel the pulse in the car, the air heavy, waiting. I was trapped. That's all there was to it. Trapped next to someone who knew exactly how the game worked, in a car with a driver who had already done this before, in a darkness that didn't belong to the world outside. I don't know if anyone else would believe me. I don't know if I would believe me if I heard this from someone else. But I know what I felt, what I saw, what I realized. And I know that the last one screamed too much, and that I wasn't going to make that mistake. I was just stuck, watching, waiting, knowing that the next move was not mine to make, and hoping beyond hope that somehow I would wake up in a world that made sense again. I thought I had picked a normal place for a first date. It was one of those restaurants that tries to feel fancy, but isn't really. Dim lighting, candles on the tables, soft jazz playing low enough that it shouldn't be distracting. I got there first, of course, and picked a table in the corner, the kind that lets you see the whole room without being seen too much. I ordered a drink while I waited, just trying to calm my nerves. First dates always make me feel like my stomach is full of sharp little knives, twisting around and reminding me that I don't know anyone, not really. He showed up a few minutes later, casually, smiling, dressed like he cared, but not too much. I thought me get lucked out. We sat down, talked about nothing in particular at first, music, movies, work, little things. I tried to laugh naturally, tried to act like I wasn't completely aware of every tiny detail of him, the way he held the menu, the way his eyes scanned the room. I noticed he was calm, unnaturally calm, like he wasn't actually here for dinner, or for some kind of inspection. I laughed it off in my head, told myself I was overthinking. Then, halfway through our conversation, it happened. I noticed it first when a waitress walked by. Her tray paused midair. Plates frozen, a drink tilted, suspended. She didn't move, didn't blink. I blinked, looked again. The couple at the table next to us, their mouths open in laughter, stopped mid-laugh, eyes frozen in place. Candles flickered and hummed like they were suspended in time. The music stuttered once and then continued, But the instruments were stuck mid-motion, hands frozen over keys, drumsticks paused in midair. I froze too, my heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I wanted to stand, to yell, to run, but my legs refused to obey. I turned to him, eyes wide, trying to process. And he just smiled, calm, casual, like everything was normal. He leaned back slightly, resting an elbow on the table, and said something that didn't come out as words, but as this heavy, sinking understanding in my chest. That's when I realized he was the only one moving, the only one alive in a room full of frozen people. I don't know how long I stared. I wanted to cry, to laugh, to scream, to do anything to make sense of it, but it was useless. The way he looked at me then, calm, measured, terrifying, it was like he'd been expecting me all along. I wanted to ask why, what this was, how it was even possible, but the words didn't come. And then with that same calm voice he explained, not in words I could repeat to anyone else, but in a clarity that cut through the impossible. This is how he chose who was worth keeping. The world outside the table, the restaurant, the city itself, seemed irrelevant now. I could feel every detail of the frozen people, the way their expressions were locked in time, the way their fingers hovered over drinks or menus, the way the candlelight stretched across their faces like it was carved in wax. And I realized that I was under scrutiny, like some specimen being weighed and measured for a verdict I didn't understand but couldn't escape. I tried to reason. Maybe it was a hallucination, maybe a trick, maybe some kind of hidden camera thing, but the logic fell apart the second I realized he was the only one moving. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud, echoing in the silence of the frozen room. I could smell the faint mix of his cologne and the food on the table. I could see the tiny movements in his hand as he lifted a fork, the subtle shift in his eyes as he watched me, calculating, assessing. I don't remember how long it lasted. Minutes, hours, I don't know. Time had no meaning. I just sat there tense, feeling the weight of 100 frozen people around me, and knowing that every second I stayed still was a second I was being tested. He didn't hurry me, didn't push, didn't show impatience. Just that calm, terrifying presence that made me understand without words that my fate was being decided right there, at that corner table. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way his eyes didn't quite reflect the candlelight, the way the shadows in the room shifted around him but not anyone else, the way the air seemed heavier near him, thick like it had substance. I realized that this wasn't magic, wasn't supernatural in the way movies show it. It was something else, something deliberate, methodical, like the world itself had bent to his will, freezing everyone but him to isolate me, to observe me without interruption, without interference. My thoughts ran wild. I wanted to move, to test it, to see if I could run, but every time I tried to stand, my legs trembled, almost like they were glued to the chair. I wanted to speak, to break the spell, to demand answers, but my voice refused. And he watched, calm, unhurried, smiling like it was all perfectly ordinary to him. The terror wasn't in what he did, it was in how natural it was to him, like this was a ritual, a habit, and I was just another subject in a long line of experiments I couldn't comprehend. The candles flickered slightly as if sensing my fear. I tried to focus on them, to ground myself, to remind myself that I was still alive, but the flicker only made the frozen expressions of everyone else more pronounced. Every detail was horrifying, a slight tilt of a head, a finger pointing toward a plate, a half-eaten bite frozen in midair. And through it all, he remained completely at ease watching, waiting, evaluating. I started thinking about what he meant by worth keeping. Did that mean I wasn't? Did that mean everyone else had failed some invisible test? I tried to recall our conversation from earlier, searching for clues, but nothing fit. Everything he had said, every casual laugh, every story about his work or his life, suddenly felt like a trap, carefully designed to see how I would react under pressure. I could feel the tension in my chest, the way my heartbeat accelerated, and realized I was probably exactly what he wanted to see. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only sit and watch, the frozen world around me heavy and silent, feeling the weight of this calm assessment pressing down on me. And then I understood that there would be no warning, no sign, no signal. He didn't need to tell me what would happen. I would know in a way deeper than words could convey if I failed, and I would know if I passed. The room wasn't frozen to protect me. It was frozen to isolate me, to strip away distractions, to let him measure me completely. The candlelight stretched longer shadows across the frozen diners, The instruments of the jazz band paused mid-note, and I realized that life itself had narrowed to this table. This moment, this calm, deliberate man across from me. I could feel the air in the room thicken further, smell the faint mix of wine and perfume, hear the faint creak of the chairs that only moved because of his subtle gestures. And I understood then that I wasn't in a restaurant anymore. I was in a space designed to test me, to strip away all the mundane noise of the world, and to see if I was worth keeping. Hours, maybe days, I don't know, passed. My mind was spinning, trapped in the silence of the frozen world. I couldn't breathe right, couldn't think straight, and yet I remained trapped in the observation of the calm, unhurried figure across from me. Every detail mattered. The tilt of his hand, the slight raise of an eyebrow, the way his eyes never left me. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cruel. He was just patient. Waiting, knowing, assessing. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the world around me started moving again. Plates clinked, glasses rattled, the music jumped a few notes, the candle flames flickered in real time. The frozen diners resumed their conversations, oblivious to what had just happened. And he leaned back, casual, calm, as if nothing had changed, as if it had been a normal night all along. I didn't leave right away. I couldn't. I just sat, trying to process, trying to convince myself that it was over, that I hadn't just been part of something impossible, something designed to strip me bare, to assess me. I didn't understand it, and I don't think I ever will, but I know what I felt, what I saw, and what it meant to be measured by someone who moves while the world freezes, someone who decides who is worth keeping without anyone else even noticing. I left eventually, stumbling into the night, the city streets normal again, lights flickering, cars moving, people alive. But the memory stayed, the calmness, the assessment, the frozen room. And I knew that somewhere in some quiet corner of the world, he was out there, waiting, choosing, evaluating, and that first date had been more than a test. It had been a judgment. I didn't expect much from the first date. I mean, it was a Wednesday night, a small cafe tucked behind a strip of shops I'd never noticed before. The kind of place with mismatched chairs, tablecloths with little stains that had been there for years, and a smell of coffee strong enough to make you gag if you weren't careful. I got there early because I hate being late, and I always like to scope the place out. The chairs squeaked when I sat down, the lights flickered faintly, and the barista behind the counter didn't even glance up at me as I waited. She showed up later, wearing a jacket that was too warm for the weather and boots that clicked too loudly on the wooden floor. I smiled at her. She smiled back, and I could feel that tiny twist of nervous energy in my stomach, the one that makes your palms sweat and your jaw stiff. We sat, ordered coffee, tried to make small talk. Everything seemed normal at first. She asked me if I had any allergies. I didn't think much of it. What kind of question is that for a coffee date? But I answered honestly, peanuts. Her smile was sudden, sharp, like a knife sliding across glass. It didn't feel friendly. It didn't feel joking. It felt like she had been waiting for the answer. The way she leaned back slightly, the way her eyes glimmered under the dim cafe lights, it made my stomach twist. My throat tightened, but the words I wanted to say wouldn't come out. She nodded slowly, almost approvingly, and I got the sense that whatever was coming next was deliberate, expected, and far worse than I could comprehend. The cafe around us seemed to blur. I noticed it first when the barista froze mid-pour, coffee spilling slowly in midair like time itself had lost patience. A couple at a table behind her stopped moving, their heads tilted, mid-laugh, fork paused inches from a plate. My hands gripped the table, knuckles turning white, but I kept trying to focus on her, the one moving person in a world that had suddenly gone wrong. Her smile widened just slightly, but it wasn't natural. It was precise, controlled, like she was practicing it for some audience I couldn't see. I tried to speak, to tell myself this was a joke, a prank, anything but no words would form. The air felt heavy, almost tangible, pressing against my chest, my lungs struggling to expand. I realized then that the cafe itself had changed. Every detail, from the chipped cups to the sticky floors, seemed sharper, more real, and more terrifying because I was the only one who had noticed it. I tried to shift my gaze to the frozen customers, searching for clues. Nothing moved. Plates hung in midair, drinks tilted without spilling, fingers suspended above napkins. I wanted to get up, leave, bolt for the door, but my legs were locked, my body betraying me. And she, calm, collected, unaffected, kept watching me like a scientist observing an experiment. Her eyes weren't soft or warm. They were precise, evaluating, weighing me without mercy. I thought maybe she had gone crazy, maybe this was some elaborate illusion, but the longer I looked, the more I understood that it wasn't her mind that was strange. It was the reality around us. Time had bent. People had stopped. And she had somehow chosen me to remain, to be fully conscious in this frozen world. I could feel panic rising, clawing at my chest, making my hands tremble. But she didn't move faster, didn't rush me. She just smiled, leaned back slightly, and that smile told me that she knew exactly what she was doing. Every instinct screamed that I should leave. But I realized the moment I tried to stand that leaving wasn't an option. I was locked in, trapped with her in a room that had suddenly turned into something alive, something watching. The smell of coffee, the faint sweetness of pastries, became oppressive, almost suffocating. The flicker of the lights above didn't help. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the room, and I felt like they were reaching for me, trying to pull me into the same frozen state as everyone else. And still, she smiled, calm, measured, precise, like nothing could touch her, like she was the only thing real in the world. I tried to analyze her, to figure out what had led to this moment. Nothing made sense. There was no trick, no hidden camera, no explanation that didn't feel insane. And then I realized the weight of what she had said earlier, the smile, the calculation in her eyes. She liked the quiet ones. She liked control. The cafe, the frozen people, the tension in the air, it all made sense in a horrifying way. This wasn't random. This was deliberate, and I was the target. The minutes stretched. I don't know how long time lost all meaning. I could hear the faint ticking of something, not a clock, not a heartbeat, just the sound of life that wasn't moving around me. My own heartbeat roared in my ears, reminding me that I was alive, aware, conscious, and utterly vulnerable. Every detail she had chosen mattered. The seat she picked, the table in the corner, the way she had asked about my allergies. It had all been a setup, perfectly designed to bring me here, to this moment, to this, awareness of my own fragility. I tried to speak again, to make her stop, to plead silently, but my voice refused. It wasn't fear exactly. It was like the air itself had thickened around me, holding me still. My hands gripped the edge of the table, nails digging into the wood, and I realized that any sudden move might trigger something, anything I didn't want to imagine. She wasn't moving toward me, not yet, but she didn't need to. I was trapped simply by her presence, by the frozen world she controlled, by the knowledge of her intentions. The cafe lights flickered again, long shadows stretching across the frozen figures around us. I could see the faint outline of a spilled cup, the sugar still mid-fall, a faint drip from a faucet that had frozen mid-splash. Every detail was magnified, grotesque, and I realized that she had orchestrated it all for me to witness, to be aware, to understand the power she held. And I could feel it pressing down, heavy, almost alive, threatening to crush the rational part of my mind that still refused to believe this was real. I tried to remember the conversation before the date, any small clue I might have missed. Her casual questions, her laughter, the way she had ordered coffee, a slight smirk when she mentioned allergies. Every detail that had seemed normal now felt like a prelude, a test, a step in a sequence I hadn't realized I was part of. And then it clicked. The words weren't just a question, they were a promise. Peanuts, quiet, death, control. I was supposed to be aware. I was supposed to understand, and I was supposed to fear. I felt my stomach tighten, my chest burn, but I couldn't move. She leaned slightly forward, tapping her fingers on the table, and I realized that was the final step. Observation, assessment, judgment. I could feel it in my bones, in the flicker of candlelight across the frozen pastries, in the unnatural stillness of the air. This wasn't a cafe anymore. It was a stage, a testing ground, a trap. And I was the audience and the subject at the same time. Time stretched, indefinite, eternal. I don't know if anyone else was aware, if anyone else had ever noticed the quiet precision she brought to moments like this. I only knew I was conscious, aware, and trapped in a moment that had been crafted for me from the start. Every instinct screamed to leave, but the door was just a door, a symbol, not an option. Every frozen customer, every suspended coffee droplet, every unmoving shadow told me that she had power over more than just the immediate. She had power over perception, over movement, over the thin thread of life that made me aware. Eventually, the world snapped back. Coffee spilled, cups clattered, the barista flinched. The couple resumed their conversation mid-laugh. The lights normalized, shadows fell where they should, and the air lost its weight. I was trembling, sweat dripping down my back, trying to breathe normally again. She smiled at me again, calm, casual, like nothing had happened. I couldn't speak, couldn't react, just sat there trying to process the sheer magnitude of what I had witnessed. She finished her coffee, paid the bill, and stood. I followed mechanically, my legs stiff, my mind buzzing with adrenaline and disbelief. We walked out of the cafe into the normal city night. The normal lights, the normal sounds, and for a second I almost believed it had been a hallucination, a nightmare, some trick of the mind. But I knew better. I could still feel the weight of the frozen world pressing on me, still feel the echo of her presence, the calculation in her smile, the promise in her question about peanuts. I never went on another date with her. I never saw her again. But sometimes when I'm in a cafe, in a restaurant, even walking past a street corner, I feel a freeze creep in, the same pressure, the same weight, like the world is pausing around me, waiting to see if I'm worth noticing. So I met this guy on a dating app, and we decided to meet at this little coffee shop on the edge of town. Not the usual chain stuff. That's kind of hole-in-the-wall place with old couches and weird paintings everywhere. I was late, of course, and by the time I walked in, he was already sitting at a corner table pretending to scroll on his phone but totally looking around like he was waiting for someone important. First thing I noticed, he had this nervous energy, not the cute kind, more like someone who was thinking 10 steps ahead about something I didn't want to know about. He smiled when he saw me waved, and I waved back, trying not to look too suspicious because honestly, first dates freak me out anyway. We ordered coffee, him some weird black drink I've never heard of, and me a caramel latte, and sat down. The conversation started normal, where are you from? What do you do? Do you like hiking kind of stuff? He talked a lot about his job at some tech company like he was proud of it, but I noticed he kept checking his phone every few seconds, his thumb hovering over it like he was expecting a text that might blow up his brain if it didn't come. I didn't think much of it at first. After a while, we got into music, movies, dumb internet stuff, and I started feeling like maybe this could actually be okay. He leaned back, relaxed a bit, and for a second I thought maybe I misjudged him. Then he got this weird smile and said something like, I like to keep things organized. I nodded, not thinking much of it. Then he pulled out his phone to show me a funny meme. The screen lit up and it opened straight to a spreadsheet. I didn't even have time to react before my stomach turned over. There were names. My gut told me these were women he dated. Next to each name were columns labeled things like boiled, fried, roasted, grilled, baked. And then numbers. Numbers that looked like scores, like he had been rating these women based on how good he thought they'd taste if cooked that way. My brain just froze. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it, thinking maybe this was some kind of messed up joke. But the way the cells were filled out, some had notes, little descriptions. He had typed tender next to one, crispy skin next to another, needs more spice. My first thought was, this is not real. This cannot be real. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe he was doing some kind of twisted art project or performance, but the way he casually scrolled through it like it was normal made my chest tighten. I kept looking for a way out, like if I pretended I was interested in the spreadsheet, maybe he'd close it. But he didn't. He leaned over and tapped a few cells, explaining something like, this one is better boiled, but she's too tough to grill. I remember thinking I was going to throw up right there on his creepy vintage couch. I couldn't focus on anything else. The music in the coffee shop, the smell of burnt espresso, even the guy sitting behind us laughing at his laptop. All of it disappeared. My mind was stuck on that spreadsheet. I kept trying to imagine a way to make him stop, but he didn't see me staring at him. He was too absorbed in whatever sick obsession this was. Every detail was calculated. Every woman rated, categorized, analyzed, and I realized if I stayed there, I was going to be another row on that list, maybe with my own column of numbers. I don't remember how I got my coffee finished. My hand was shaking so much I had to rest it on the table like I was holding onto a lifeline. I just nodded when he talked, pretending I was into it, all the while plotting my escape. Finally, I saw a chance when he got a notification. His phone buzzed, and he leaned away to answer it. I grabbed my bag and just bolted. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even look back. I ran out into the freezing air, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to explode. I don't know if he noticed I left or if he ever even thought about closing that spreadsheet. I just knew I couldn't be near him 1 second longer. I walked for what felt like hours, trying to calm down, thinking about what I had seen. I kept replaying the spreadsheet in my head, the columns, the numbers, the notes, imagining someone scoring me in the same way. And the worst part, it wasn't a joke. Not in the way I thought a normal person would joke. This was someone who actually did this. Later, I tried to tell my friends what happened, but I couldn't even get through the story without shaking. Some of them laughed, thinking I was exaggerating, and that made it worse because I didn't want to seem insane. But it was real. I still think about that spreadsheet sometimes, the way his thumb hovered over the cells like he was in control of this weird menu of women. Every time I meet someone new now, I check their reactions, their phones, their weird little habits, and I can't shake the thought that maybe this isn't as rare as I hope it is. I never went back to that coffee shop. I stopped using the dating app I met him on. I even thought about moving apartments for a while, because I imagined him just showing up somewhere and adding my name to another sheet. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but it was real enough for me to feel unsafe in my own town. I didn't even know his last name. I don't want to know it. What gets me the most is that he wasn't a monster in any other way. He smiled, he made small talk, he laughed at jokes, he even offered me his sweater when I said I was cold. But that spreadsheet was a window into something that made me question everything about the people I meet. That casual, friendly guy I had coffee with was capable of turning women into numbers, scores, categories, and I know I will never forget what I saw. I will never look at a phone the same way again. I will never sit at a coffee shop thinking it's safe just because it smells like baked cookies and espresso. I guess the lesson, if there is one, is that some people are really good at hiding things. Some people have parts of themselves that you can't even imagine until it hits you in the face, or in my case, on the screen of a phone right across the table from you. I don't even want to imagine what he would have done if I had asked to see more of his work, if I had said yes to a second date. The thought alone makes me want to crawl under the covers and never leave my apartment again. It's been months, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about the spreadsheet, thinking about how detailed it was, thinking about how casually he treated it. And the thought that maybe someone like that is out there again, maybe even closer than I think, makes me never want to meet someone new. I keep my phone face down now. I don't let anyone touch it. I double check every app I use, every site I go to, every message I reply to. And even then, sometimes I catch myself glancing over my shoulder, imagining that spreadsheet open, numbers filling in with my name across the columns. It's messed up, but I can't stop thinking about it. And I know I probably never will. I met her through this app, the kind where you swipe a lot and hope something sticks. She seemed normal enough, maybe even boring normal, which I liked after a few months of dating people who were chaotic energy all the time. We agreed to meet at this old downtown street corner near a diner that closed at midnight. I got there early, leaning against a lamppost, watching the cars roll past, the flicker of neon signs painting the wet pavement with colors. She showed up right on time, hair messy but cute, wearing a hoodie and sneakers, and I thought, okay, maybe tonight isn't going to be awkward. Maybe this could be fine. We started walking down the street, just casual, talking about nothing really, just small stuff. I remember looking down at her as we passed under the first street light and noticing her shadow stretch along across the cracked sidewalk. That's when I saw it. There were two shadows, one exactly where it should be, following her movements perfectly. The other shadow was right next to it, the same shape at first, but something felt off. I stopped walking for a second, hoping it was just a trick of the light, a reflection maybe. But the second shadow didn't just follow her. It lagged slightly, then jerked in ways her body didn't. I tried to ignore it at first, figuring my brain was overreacting. Maybe it was a tree branch, maybe some reflection from the diner's glass. I kept my eyes on the shadow, and that's when it really started moving differently. When she lifted her arm to brush her hair back, the second shadow twisted like a puppet with broken strings. When she turned to check something on her phone, the shadow stretched straight up like it was trying to crawl into the air. I froze, my chest tightening, trying not to breathe too loud because it felt like if I acknowledged it too much it would notice me noticing. We kept walking, or I tried to, but I couldn't stop glancing down. Every streetlight we passed, the shadow acted differently. Sometimes it went behind her body, sometimes in front, sometimes crouching like it had knees she didn't. My brain was screaming that this isn't normal. I thought about saying something, pointing it out, but the second it would catch my attention, it would snap back to normal for a second like it knew I was looking. Then it would do something else, jerky, twitchy, human but wrong. By the time we got near this small park, the shadows were impossible to ignore. The sidewalk cracked and bent in the light, but it wasn't the pavement, it was that shadow. It crouched when she walked straight, leaned when she stood still. It wasn't following physics, it wasn't following logic. My stomach was knotting, my hands sweaty, but I didn't want to freak out. I didn't want to be that person who loses it on a first date. But the shadow of that thing, it wasn't normal. It was something else. Something attached. Something alive. I started looking for patterns, like maybe it was just repeating certain moves, but it wasn't predictable. Sometimes it ran ahead, sometimes it lagged behind. Sometimes it mirrored her exactly for a second, then stretched sideways into shapes that looked like fingers reaching for me. I wanted to stop, to walk back, to run home, but I couldn't. Part of me was frozen watching this. I couldn't break eye contact because if I did, maybe it would disappear, maybe I would lose my mind without proof. We crossed an alley lit only by a flickering orange light, and it really started acting out. It leaned against a wall that didn't exist in the right spot. When she kicked a small soda can, the shadow didn't move with it. It moved away first, like it anticipated the motion before reality happened. My brain was yelling, screaming that this was impossible. I wanted to turn and walk home, leave her there, leave everything, but I couldn't. I was too fascinated, too terrified to look away. She laughed at something on her phone, and the shadow didn't. It just tilted its head, stiff, unnatural. I remember thinking if anyone saw me staring at the ground like that, they would call the cops or an ambulance. I wanted to tell someone, text someone, anyone. My phone was in my pocket, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. The shadow was separate. It was free from her movements, from her control, and it was aware. That's the word that hit me. Aware. We kept walking, the streetlights thinning out, the night getting darker, and the shadow kept changing. At some point, it crouched and twisted around a small street sign, hugging it like it was alive. I could feel it watching me as much as I could feel her walking next to me. My skin crawled, every hair on my arm standing straight up. My mind was screaming, I need to leave, I need to get out, but my body felt frozen. It was like I was in a dream I couldn't wake up from. Finally, we got near the diner. Its neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting pink and blue light on everything. I thought maybe in the bright lights the shadow would go back to normal. It didn't. In the neon glow, it looked taller, thinner, more jagged. It moved like it was testing the limits of space, stretching and shrinking without reason. I stopped walking for a second, realizing that if I stepped closer, it might leap off the sidewalk entirely. My heart was pounding, my throat dry, but I pretended I was adjusting my hoodie and glanced down. The shadow froze for a second, then darted sideways in a way that made no sense. I swear I could see little flickers of something like tiny limbs or claws beneath it, but I couldn't be sure. My brain refused to process it completely because if I did, I knew I would lose control. She kept walking, oblivious, her own shadow moving normally next to her, like it didn't even know what was happening. That's when I realized whatever this was, it was attached to her, but not her. Not fully human. Something else following along. Something that belonged to the night more than it belonged to her. We got to the diner and I couldn't think straight. I felt like vomiting, but my legs kept moving, stepping inside. The air inside smelled of fried food, warm grease, and sugar. Normal, boring, human smells. I wanted to relax, but my eyes kept darting to the windows where the street lights outside cast shadows into the glass. The second shadow was still there, stretching along the sidewalk outside, moving in ways that couldn't exist. I could see it from the corner of my eye, flickering like static on an old TV, sliding along the walls of the buildings. It didn't step inside. It didn't follow the laws of matter, it just existed. I sat down across from her, pretending I was fine. I sipped my drink and stared straight ahead, but I couldn't stop thinking about that shadow. I thought maybe if I ignored it, it would go away. Maybe it was tied to my own fear. But then when I looked up from my cup, I caught it in the reflection of the window. It was moving independently, crouching, twisting, turning its head to stare at me like it was sizing me up. I felt my stomach drop. The night dragged on, coffee growing cold, the conversation stuttering because I couldn't focus on words. My mind kept returning to that shadow outside, thinking about what it wanted, why it existed, how it was attached to her. Every time she laughed, it did something different. Every time she moved, it acted like it had a mind of its own. I didn't even want to get up to leave because I was too afraid to see it close up, too afraid to see if it would detach and come for me. Eventually, I had to leave. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stay another second. I told her I had an early morning. She nodded, smiling, completely unaware. We walked outside, and the shadows were back under the streetlights, the second one still twisting and jerking like it had its own energy, its own will. I kept my eyes on it as we walked, trying to keep calm, trying to walk like everything was normal. But the second we got to the corner where we split, it did something impossible. It stepped toward me, just a little. Not fully, but enough that I could feel it reach toward my chest. I bolted, not even saying goodbye, sprinting down the street, my phone in my pocket vibrating from missed messages. I didn't look back until I was several blocks away, hiding under another streetlight. The night was empty. The shadow was gone. She was gone. The city was just normal again. But I knew it was still attached to her, still alive, still waiting, and I couldn't shake the feeling it had known I was going to leave, that it had reached for me before I even moved. I never called her again. I stopped using the app. I changed my walking routes, never at night, never alone. But the image of that second shadow keeps replaying. Its way of moving, its awareness, the way it didn't belong to this world, yet somehow followed her like it was her twin made of darkness. I can't explain it. I can't rationalize it, and I don't even try it anymore. I just avoid streets with weird lighting. I avoid walking behind anyone at night, and I avoid thinking about what it might have wanted if I hadn't left. The city feels different now, like it has pockets where things exist that you can't see, and some of them might be following you, not attached to you, but waiting for you to notice. I met him at this tiny diner on the edge of the city, the kind of place that smelled like greasy hash browns and syrup and nothing else. The kind where the booths are sticky and the neon signs hum softly overhead. I got there early, of course, because I always do, and I picked a corner booth with a cracked seat and a view of the street. He said he'd be there around 7, and I wasn't worried because I've had enough flaky dates to know the wait is normal. Then he showed up out of nowhere, slipping into the booth across from me, smiling like he'd been there all along. At first, everything seemed normal. He talked about his job like it wasn't boring, about music I had never heard of, movies that were weirdly specific. I laughed at the right moments, nodded, tried to seem interested, but I was paying attention to how he moved, the way his eyes followed me, the way he rested his hands on the table like he owned the booth. We talked for 2 hours, easy and flowing, like we'd known each other for years instead of minutes. Then the first person walked up to my booth. A woman younger than me, holding a bag and looking flustered. She apologized for being late and paused, confused, like she couldn't see him. I blinked and smiled politely, assuming she just didn't notice him because maybe he was leaning back or something. She left after muttering sorry again. Then another person came. A waiter maybe offering me a refill. He said sorry, that he was late because the booth seemed occupied. I looked at my date, who was chatting and smiling like everything was normal, and I realized something was off. The waiter didn't see him at all. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe I was imagining things. But then it happened again. A couple of people walked by the booth, waved to him, apologized, looked at me funny, like I was sitting alone talking to myself. That's when it clicked. I stopped mid-sentence and just stared. He was still there, smiling, talking, leaning forward as if he could hear me, as if we were in the same reality. But everyone else couldn't see him. Everyone else was apologizing to me for being stood up, for taking my table, for bumping into nothing. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was invisible to them in some normal way, like they just didn't notice him. But it kept happening. I started noticing tiny things I had ignored before. The silverware he reached for didn't clang against the plate. His glass never tipped when he moved it. I reached for his hand at one point, the first time I tried physical contact, and my fingers closed on empty air. The booth felt heavier in the spaces he occupied, but nothing touched me. My heart was hammering, my brain trying to fill in gaps that had no explanation. I thought about leaving, but I couldn't move. Something about him made me frozen, made me want to hear every word he said, even though my body was screaming that this was wrong. He smiled, leaned back, and I realized he didn't notice the invisible barrier between us. He didn't notice that no one else could see him. I was the only one. That was horrifying. Time passed differently with him. We laughed. We drank coffee that never cooled. We shared stories that felt real. But outside the diner, the world went on. People came in, people left. People apologized for bumping into my invisible companion. I kept glancing toward the window, expecting someone to reach across the table and ask who I was talking to. Nobody ever did, and the longer I sat there, the heavier it felt, like my own reality was starting to fracture. I started paying attention to details I hadn't before. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the slight twitch in his smile, the way his eyes never really focused on me fully but seemed to look past me into something else. I realized he wasn't just invisible to the world, he was partly invisible to himself. Maybe he didn't belong here. Maybe he wasn't meant to exist in the same space as other people. Maybe he was some echo I had summoned without realizing it. I tried to leave several times. My purse, my coat, my bag. I stood up, packed, and the booth felt wrong. Empty. I looked across and he was gone, but then he reappeared the next second, sitting casually, like he'd never left. The world outside ignored him, the waitress ignored him, the people in the diner ignored him, but I couldn't. I was trapped in this limbo of normal and not normal, of human and something else entirely. The worst part was when I realized I couldn't even describe him to anyone. If I tried, they would think I was crazy. He didn't cast shadows like normal, he didn't leave crumbs, he didn't interact with anything tangible. And the more I tried to make him real, the more unreal he became. It was like watching fog try to take shape, like talking to a reflection that could speak back. I wanted him to be normal, I wanted him to be real, but I couldn't. At some point, I stopped trying to explain. I just sat there, drinking coffee that never ended, listening to him talk about things that didn't matter, and watching the world go on around us like he wasn't part of it. I caught people staring at me, whispering, apologizing, moving around me as if I was the one who was invisible, and it broke something in me. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't standing alone, but the way they acted, the way they didn't see him, made me feel like I didn't belong either. 2 hours passed, maybe more, maybe less. I didn't check the time. I was too afraid to. I thought about slipping out the door, pretending I had to be somewhere else, but the second I moved, he would look at me, smile, and my legs wouldn't work. It was like gravity had doubled on my joints. I wanted to scream, to get someone's attention, but no one could help me. He existed only in the space I occupied, only in the reality my eyes could reach, and I hated myself for not leaving sooner. Finally, the diner closed. The lights flickered and dimmed, the neon sign buzzed, and he leaned back, stretching like the whole thing had been casual. I realized then that maybe he had been testing me all along, seeing if I would notice, seeing if I would panic, seeing if I would acknowledge the world outside the tiny bubble he occupied. I wanted to run, to bolt into the night, but I couldn't, not until the last light went out. When I finally left, the street was empty, the city quiet, and I thought maybe I was free. But I could still feel him beside me, whispering in a way that only I could hear, brushing against the edge of my perception, impossible and yet undeniable. I walked home fast, the kind of fast where your legs burn and your lungs scream, never once looking back, but always aware that someone invisible was still there, moving with me. I stopped using dating apps for months. I stopped trusting anyone who seemed normal. Every time I sat in a cafe, I glanced around, making sure the people I talked to weren't invisible, making sure the world agreed with what my senses told me. It was exhausting, draining, impossible to explain, and I didn't want to explain. I couldn't. The fact that I had spent 2 hours talking to someone the world couldn't see made me feel like I had fallen through reality itself. And maybe that's the worst part. He wasn't trying to hurt me, I don't think. He was just there. And I was just there. Two realities overlapping in a tiny diner that no one else cared about. I haven't gone back. I don't plan to. But sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear him, right at the edge of my hearing, whispering about things that don't exist. And I know if I ever turn around, he'll be there, waiting, smiling, still invisible to the world, still entirely real to me.